Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Theodore Millstone, but everyone calls me Ted. I've been a forest ranger for 14 years now, working the backcountry trails of George Washington National Forest here in Virginia. Most folks think being a ranger is all about campfires and lost hikers, but they're wrong. The mountains hold secrets that would make your blood run cold. It was late September, 1962, when everything changed. The maple leaves had turned that deep red color, like blood against the gray sky. I was fixing a broken trail marker near Devil's Backbone Ridge when my radio crackled to life. "Ted, we got a problem," came the voice of my supervisor, Bill Hardy. "Got a family missing up at Devil's Backbone Trailhead. The Hendersons, mom, dad, and 3 kids. Their car's still there, but nobody's seen them since yesterday morning." I knew that area like the back of my hand. It's rough country, full of steep hollows and hidden caves. The Cherokee used to tell stories about that place. Something about stone giants called None You Knew We. Of course, I never paid much attention to old stories. I figured they were just tales to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. "I'll head up there now," I told Bill. What'd their camp look like? That's the strange part. Everything's still set up perfect. Food's still sitting on the camp stove, still warm when we found it this morning, like they just walked away in the middle of cooking breakfast. I grabbed my pack and started hiking toward the trailhead. The autumn air had that sharp bite that meant winter was coming early this year. As I walked, I thought about my wife Sarah and my twin boys back home. They worried about me working alone in the backcountry. But I'd seen worse things in Korea. At least the mountains didn't shoot back. The Henderson campsite was exactly like Bill described. Their blue tent stood perfect and neat, guy lines tight like someone who knew what they were doing. The camp stove still had eggs in the pan, burned black by now. Coffee pot was half full and cold as stone. But something was wrong, really wrong. I've tracked everything from lost hunters to wounded bears, and I know what normal looks like. This wasn't normal. The family's clothes were folded neat as you please and stacked on a flat rock about 20 feet from their tent, not thrown down or scattered like you'd expect from people running scared. Folded, like someone was getting ready for church. And there were footprints. I've seen every kind of track these mountains can make. Deer, bear, wild boar, even the occasional mountain lion. But these prints were different. They looked almost human, except they were huge. 20 inches long, pressed deep into solid rock like someone had stepped in wet cement. The rock around each print was cracked and broken, like whatever made them weighed more than any living thing should. The prints led away from the campsite, heading down into Millstone Hollow. Funny thing about that name, it's been called that for as long as anyone can remember. Same as my family name. My grandfather used to joke that our family was tied to this place somehow, but I never knew what he meant. As I followed the trail, the forest got quieter. Not the peaceful quiet you expect in deep woods, but the wrong kind of quiet, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering. Even the wind seemed to die away as I got deeper into the hollow. My Korean War training kicked in. In the war, when everything went silent like this, it meant trouble was coming. Big trouble. But this felt different. Older. Like something had been sleeping down here for a long, long time. And maybe it was starting to wake up. I checked my compass, but the needle was spinning like a drunk man trying to walk a straight line. My altimeter readings made no sense either. According to the gauge, I was somehow below sea level, which was impossible this high in the mountains. The deeper I went into Millstone Hollow, the more wrong everything felt. The trees looked normal enough, but their shadows fell the wrong way. Rocks seemed to shift position when I wasn't looking straight at them, and somewhere, far below in the darkness between the hills, I could swear I heard something breathing. Something big. The first thing I found was the blood. It was pooled in the center of an old stone circle, the kind Cherokee shamans used for ceremonies hundreds of years ago. The blood was fresh, dark red, and still sticky. Too much blood for a small animal, but not spread around like you'd expect from an attack. It was collected neat and tidy in a bowl-shaped depression in the center stone. I knelt down and dipped my finger in it. Human blood. I was sure of it. Around the stone circle, I found more of the giant footprints. They circled the stones like whatever made them had been walking in a pattern. The prints were deeper here, and the rock around them was completely shattered. "Hello," I called out, my voice echoing off the hollow walls. "Henderson family, can you hear me?" Nothing answered except my own echo, bouncing back and forth between the hills like a ghost of my words. I followed the blood trail away from the stone circle. It led to a pile of torn clothing arranged in a careful pattern around a flat boulder that looked like an altar. I recognized the plaid shirt. It matched what Bill had described the father wearing. That's when I found Jim Henderson. He was wedged between two huge rocks like they'd been pressed together with him in the middle. What was left of him, anyway. His bones had been crushed to powder, but his face was still perfect, eyes wide open and staring at the sky. The expression on his face wasn't fear or pain. It was confusion, like he couldn't understand what was happening to him, even as it killed him. I've seen men die in war, but this was different. This was personal, cruel. Like whatever did it enjoyed taking its time. My hands shook as I reached for my radio. Dead static. Of course, I was too deep in the hollow for the signal to get through. I'd have to hike back up to the ridge to call for help. But as I turned to go, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Singing. A woman's voice, sweet and clear, coming from somewhere deeper in the hollow. It was Carol Henderson. ISE, had to be. I'd met her once at a church social. She had a beautiful voice, always sang in the choir. "Mrs. Henderson," I shouted, running toward the sound. "Carol, where are you?" The singing stopped. I came around a bend in the trail and saw her. Carol Henderson was standing with her back to me, looking up at the cliff face like she was admiring the view. She was still wearing the yellow dress Bill had described, bright as sunshine against the gray rocks. "Mrs. Henderson," I said, walking up behind her. "Thank God you're all right. We've been looking everywhere for you." She didn't turn around, didn't move at all. "Carol?" I reached out to touch her shoulder. My hand went right through solid rock. She was embedded in the cliff face up to her neck, the stone grown around her like she'd been there for years. Her mouth was open, like she'd been singing when it happened. Her eyes moved to look at me, and her lips formed one word. "Run." I stumbled backward, my mind refusing to accept what I was seeing. People don't get absorbed into rock faces. It's impossible. But there she was, alive and talking, with tons of granite wrapped around her like a stone coffin. That's when I heard the footsteps. Heavy, slow, coming from the direction I'd just walked. Each step sounded like a boulder rolling down a hill. The ground shook under my feet with every impact. I looked back the way I'd come and saw it. The thing walking toward me was 12 feet tall and looked like it had been carved out of the mountain itself. Granite and limestone muscles moved under its rocky skin as it walked. Its face was roughly human, but ancient, like looking at a statue that had been weathered by wind and rain for 1,000 years. Its eyes were holes in the rock that seemed to go down forever. I did what any sane person would do. I ran. Behind me, I could hear the stone giant picking up speed. Each footstep cracked the ground like an earthquake. Tree branches snapped like twigs as it pushed through the forest after me. My radio crackled to life as I climbed higher up the hollow. Ted, are you there? Danny Westbrook's on his way to help you. Fresh out of ranger training, but he's eager to help. I keyed the mic while I ran. Bill, whatever you do, don't send anyone else down here. There's something in these woods that shouldn't exist. What are you talking about? Ted, you're breaking up. The radio went dead again as I lost altitude. Behind me, the footsteps had stopped. I looked back, but didn't see anything, just empty forest and the afternoon shadows getting longer. But I could feel it watching me, waiting. Something was very wrong with Millstone Hollow, and I was starting to think the old Cherokee stories weren't stories at all. Danny Westbrook looked like he was about 12 years old, all fresh-faced and eager to help. He met me at the trailhead just as the sun was starting to set, casting long shadows through the trees. "Mr. Millstone, sir. I'm here to assist with the search and rescue operation." He stood up straight like he was still in training camp. "Danny, I need you to listen to me very carefully," I said. "There's something down in that hollow that killed Jim Henderson and did something impossible to his wife. We need to call for help from the state police. maybe even the National Guard. Danny's face scrunched up like I'd told him Santa Claus was real. Sir, with respect, maybe you're just tired. Search and rescue can be stressful, and sometimes our minds play tricks on us. I wanted to shake him. Instead, I showed him the photos I'd taken with my camera. Jim Henderson crushed between the rocks, Carol Henderson's face sticking out of solid stone, the giant footprints that shouldn't exist. Danny looked at the pictures for a long time, his face getting paler and paler. These have to be fake somehow. People don't get absorbed into rock. That's what I thought too. Come on, I'll show you where I found them. We hiked down into the hollow as darkness fell. Danny kept checking his compass and shaking it like it was broken. Sir, my compass is malfunctioning too, and it's getting really cold really fast. He was right. The temperature had dropped at least 20 degrees since we entered the hollow. Our breath came out in white puffs, and frost was forming on the trees, even though it had been warm just an hour ago. Danny, I said quietly, when we get down there, stay close to me. Don't wander off. Don't touch anything. And if I tell you to run, you run as fast as you can, and don't look back. We found Jim Henderson's body first. Danny took one look and threw up behind a tree. When he came back, his face was white as paper. How is this possible? He whispered. I don't know. But we need to find the children before whatever did this finds us. That's when we heard the crying. It was coming from deeper in the hollow, a child's voice echoing off the rocks. We followed the sound through a maze of boulders until we came to a cave entrance I hadn't noticed before. The crying was definitely coming from inside. Mary? Tommy? I called. Those were the names of the two youngest Henderson children. It's Ranger Ted. We're here to help you. The crying stopped. Then a small voice called back, help us, please help us, we're trapped. Danny started toward the cave, but I grabbed his arm. Wait. Something's not right. What do you mean? Those kids need our help. I studied the cave entrance. The stone around it looked wrong somehow, like it was newer than the rest of the cliff. And there was that smell, like wet concrete and old bones. Mary, I called again. Where's your brother, Tommy? He's here with me. Please hurry, we're scared. But I'd read the missing persons report. Tommy Henderson was 6 years old, too young to be quiet this long if he was really down there. A scared 6-year-old would be screaming for his mommy, not sitting silent while his sister did the talking. Danny, back away from the cave, slowly. But sir, the wall next to the cave entrance moved. Just slightly, like it was breathing. Then part of the cliff face stepped away from the rest of the rock. Another stone giant, this one even bigger than the first. It had been perfectly camouflaged, looking exactly like part of the cave wall until it moved. Danny screamed and ran straight toward it. Danny, no. The giant reached out with one massive stone arm and grabbed Danny around the waist. I heard his ribs crack like dry twigs. Danny's scream cut off as the stone fingers tightened. I drew my service pistol and fired 6 shots center mass. The bullets bounced off the thing's chest like I was throwing pebbles at a mountain. The stone giant looked at me with those deep, dark eyes and made a sound like rocks grinding together. Then it squeezed. Danny's body went limp. The giant pressed him against the cave wall, and I watched in horror as the stone seemed to flow around Danny like thick mud, pulling him in. In seconds, he was gone, absorbed into the rock just like Carol Henderson. But unlike Carol, Danny wasn't still alive. His eyes stared out from the stone, empty and dead. I ran. I'm not proud of it, but I ran like the devil himself was chasing me. Behind me, I could hear the giant moving through the forest, trees crashing down as it followed. But then I heard something worse. More footsteps. Coming from different directions, multiple giants, surrounding me. I made it to a small clearing and stopped, breathing hard. The footsteps had stopped too, but I could feel them out there in the darkness. Watching, waiting. What do you want? I shouted into the night. The answer came as a sound like an earthquake. Not words, but somehow I understood. They wanted me to leave. This was their place, their sacred ground. The highway construction up on the ridge had awakened them from a long sleep, and they were angry. But they weren't just angry. They were hungry. And somewhere in these woods, 2 little kids were still missing. A child's voice called out from the darkness. Ranger Ted, we're over here. This time, I was sure it was real. The voice was different, younger, more frightened, and I could hear Tommy crying in the background, just like a scared 6-year-old should. I had to choose: run for my life and let those kids die, or go into the darkness where the stone giants were waiting. Some choices aren't really choices at all. I checked my pistol, still had 6 rounds in my spare clip. Not that bullets would help much. But maybe I could distract the giants long enough for the kids to get away. "I'm coming," I called back. "Stay where you are." I walked into the darkness, toward the voices, toward whatever was waiting for me in the ancient shadows of Millstone Hollow. I found them in a cave so deep the mouth looked like a wound in the mountain. Mary and Tommy Henderson were huddled together on a ledge about 20 feet up the cave wall. They looked terrified but alive. But they weren't alone. The oldest Henderson boy, Michael, was standing at the bottom of the cave. Only he wasn't exactly standing. His feet had merged with the cave floor, and stone was slowly creeping up his legs like gray infection. But the worst part was his face. He was still conscious, still aware, tears rolling down his cheeks as the rock climbed higher up his body. "Please," he whispered when he saw me. "It hurts so much. Make it stop." Above him, Mary was crying. "We tried to pull him out, but the rock won't let go. And there's more of them coming." She was right. I could see movement in the deeper tunnels, massive shapes shifting in the darkness. The stone giants were down there, and they knew I was here. I had to think fast. My bullets were useless, but maybe there was another way. I remembered the old mining equipment scattered around these hills, rusty picks and shovels left over from the copper mining days. Iron oxide. Rust. "Mary, can you climb down?" I think so." "Good. When I say go, you grab your brother Tommy and run for the cave entrance. Don't stop. Don't look back. Get to my truck and drive to town." "I don't know how to drive." "You'll figure it out. Kids are smart that way." I pulled out my knife and started scraping rust off an old mining pick someone had left in the cave. The flakes were bright orange, like dried blood. I scattered them in a circle around Michael, hoping the old Cherokee stories were right about iron being protection against spirits. The moment the rust hit the stone around Michael's feet, the rock began to smoke. The gray stone turned black and started cracking. Michael screamed as his legs came free, but he was alive and moving. From the depths of the cave came a sound like an avalanche. The stone giants were coming, and they were angry. "Go, all of you, go now." The 3 kids ran for the entrance while I scattered the rest of my rust behind them. The first giant that charged into the light hit my rusty barrier and screamed, a sound like breaking mountains. Where the iron oxide touched its skin, the living rock crumbled away like rotten wood. But there were more of them, so many more. They came out of the deep caves like an army of moving mountains, 12 feet tall, carved from granite and limestone, with eyes like black holes and hands that could crush cars. They moved slow but steady, and there were at least 6 of them. I grabbed the rusty mining pick and swung it at the nearest giant. Where the iron blade hit, chunks of stone fell away like broken pottery. The giant stumbled back, surprised. Maybe they'd been asleep so long they'd forgotten about iron. But even with my rust weapon, I was just one man against 6 creatures that shouldn't exist. They spread out to surround me, moving with the patience of stone. They had all the time in the world. That's when I understood what my grandfather used to say about our family being tied to this place. The Cherokee didn't call this place Millstone Hollow by accident. My great-great-grandfather had been the iron worker who'd made the tools that first drove the giants back into the deep caves. The iron in our family name wasn't just coincidence. We were the guardians, always had been. I pulled off my belt buckle, solid iron, made by my grandfather's hands. I held it up like a shield, and the giants actually stepped back. They remembered. "That's right," I said, my voice echoing in the cave. "You remember the iron workers. You remember what happens when you wake up in our mountains." The largest giant, the one that had killed Danny, stepped forward. When it spoke, the voice came from the rocks themselves. Like the mountain was talking. "The iron bringers poisoned our sacred earth, drove us deep, made us sleep, but the earth shakers woke us, the loud machines on the high ridge. Our rest is broken, our hunger is great. The highway construction," I realized. "The blasting woke you up. We will feed until we sleep again. Many seasons, many iron bringers to crush, starting with the small ones who flee. The kids. They were going after the kids. I made my choice. I pulled the pin on the only grenade I'd carried back from Korea. Old habit. I'd kept it as a reminder of bad times. Never thought I'd need it in a Virginia forest. "You want to feed?" I said, holding up the grenade. "Then feed on this." I threw myself at the largest giant, pressing the grenade against its chest. The iron fragments from the explosion would spread rust throughout the cave system. Maybe enough to bring the whole thing down. 4 seconds, I whispered, like a prayer. The giant reached for me with hands like boulders. I could see the kids silhouetted against the cave entrance, safe but still running. 3 seconds. The other giants were closing in, but they were too late. Nothing moves as fast as a desperate man protecting children. 2 seconds. I thought about Sarah and my boys waiting for me at home, about Danny Westbrook, who'd never see his family again, about the Henderson parents who died trying to protect their children. 1. The explosion lit up the cave like the sun. Iron fragments flew everywhere, and where they hit the giants, the living rock began to crumble. I felt myself falling as the cave floor gave way, tons of stone collapsing into the deep tunnels. But I could still hear the kids running, their footsteps fading into the distance. They were safe. That was enough. I woke up 3 days later in a hospital bed with more broken bones than I could count. Sarah was sitting beside me, holding my hand and crying. Through the window, I could see the mountains in the distance, peaceful as always. "The kids?" was the first thing I asked. "Safe," Sarah said. "Mary, Tommy, and Michael are all safe. They're staying with their aunt in Richmond." "What happened to the cave?" "Collapsed completely. They're calling it a geological incident, gas pocket explosion or something." Her voice got quiet. "They found what was left of the Henderson parents. And that young ranger, Danny Westbrook. I'm so sorry, Ted." I nodded. I'd expected that. Over the next few weeks, the official story got pieced together. Geological instability in the old mining tunnels, underground gas pockets, natural cave-ins, the kind of explanation that made sense to people who lived in a world where rocks didn't walk around and eat people. The highway construction project got canceled. Environmental concerns, they said. Turns out some Cherokee elder had filed an injunction claiming the area was sacred burial ground. Work stopped the day after I blew up that cave. Funny how that worked out. I went back to work after my bones healed, but I never patrolled Millstone Hollow again. Officially, it was too dangerous due to geological instability. Unofficially, I knew better than to wake up things that should stay sleeping. The Henderson kids never spoke about what happened in those caves. All 3 of them went completely silent after the rescue. The doctors called it trauma-induced selective mutism. They became wards of the state when no other family could handle them. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is right, I get letters, never signed, but I know they're from Mary Henderson. She's grown up now, maybe 30 years old. The letters are always the same. They're still down there, in the deep places, sleeping again, but not gone. Thank you for keeping us safe. I keep those letters in a locked box, with my grandfather's iron tools and my father's mining equipment, just in case. Because I know something now that I didn't know before. There are places in these mountains where the old world still lives, where things that shouldn't exist wait in the darkness between the hills, dreaming stone dreams and remembering the taste of human bones. My boys are grown now, with children of their own. Sometimes they ask if I want to go camping with the grandkids, maybe show them the family land up in the mountains. I always say no. Some secrets are better left buried. And some guardians need to keep watching, even from a distance. The mountains are beautiful this time of year, with the leaves turning red as blood and the first frost making everything sharp and clear. But I don't go hiking anymore. I've learned to listen to what the mountain tells me. And these days, it whispers about sleeping giants and iron guardians, about the thin places where the old world bleeds through. It whispers about Millstone Hollow, where my family name is carved in stone and iron, where the Cherokee stories were never just stories at all. The giants sleep again. But sleep is not death. And sometimes, on the coldest nights, I can feel them dreaming. My name is Rebecca Ridgemont, but everyone calls me Becca. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 9 years now, and I've seen things that would make most people quit their jobs and move to the city. But what happened in February of 1,974 inches, the Cranberry Wilderness, changed everything I thought I knew about these mountains. I was the first woman to become a ranger in this part of West Virginia. Some of the old-timers didn't like it at first, but after I pulled 3 lost hunters out of a blizzard in my second year, they started treating me like one of them. I specialized in winter search and rescue because I grew up climbing these peaks. My daddy taught me to read snow like other people read books. The morning the emergency beacon went off, I was drinking coffee in the ranger station, watching the worst February storm in 20 years pile snow against the windows. The radio crackled to life around 6 a.m. "We've got a distress signal from Sector 7, dispatch said. College group from Virginia Tech, 6 kids on a cross-country ski trip. Beacon activated 2 hours ago." I looked out at the white wall of snow. The wind was howling so hard it made the building shake. "Weather's too bad for helicopter rescue," I said into the radio. "That's why we're sending you, Ridgemont. You know that area better than anyone." Sector 7 was high country, above 4,000 feet. In this storm, the temperature up there would be dropping to maybe 40 below with the wind chill. People could die in minutes if they weren't prepared. I loaded my pack with emergency gear, extra food, medical supplies, and my ice axe. The weight felt good on my shoulders, familiar and comforting. I'd carried scared, hurt people down mountains before. 47 successful rescues in 9 years. I was proud of that number. The snow was already knee-deep when I started up the trail. My snowshoes kept me on top of most of it, but the wind cut through my gear like it was made of paper. I'd grown up in these mountains, but this storm felt different. Angry. Like the mountain itself was trying to keep me away. It took me 4 hours to reach the area where the beacon signal was coming from. I found their base camp in a small clearing, but what I saw there made my stomach turn cold. The tents were still standing, but something had torn through them from the inside. Long, jagged cuts ran through the heavy fabric like giant claws had shredded it. Sleeping bags were scattered around the campsite, also torn apart, and there was blood frozen in the snow, not just drops or spatters. Thick, dark patches that formed weird spiral patterns around the camp. I'd seen bear attacks before. I'd seen what happened when people got desperate and started fighting each other. This wasn't either of those things. The cuts were too clean, too purposeful, and the blood patterns. They looked almost like symbols. I found a backpack half buried in the snow. Inside was a wallet belonging to David Kim, one of the missing students. There was also a journal with entries from the past 3 days. The last entry, written in shaky handwriting, made my hands shake. Day 3. We're all so hungry. Found a shelter in the old mining area. There's a man there, but something's wrong with him. He's so tall and thin, like he hasn't eaten in years. But his eyes make us hungry too. Mike ate his own fingers last night. Said they tasted good. We have plenty of food, but we can't stop being hungry. The tall man just watches and smiles. I'd heard stories from the old-timers about cannibalism in these mountains during hard winters. Miners getting trapped, trappers going crazy from isolation. But I'd always figured it was just starvation, making people do terrible things. Looking at that campsite, with the blood spirals and the torn fabric, I started to think maybe there was more to those stories. The wind picked up, and I heard something that made my skin crawl. It sounded like howling, but not from any animal I knew. It was coming from deeper in the wilderness, up toward the old mining area, where the CCC built some shelters back in the 1932. I shouldered my pack and followed the tracks leading away from the camp. They started out normal, boot prints from 6 different people, heading uphill toward the shelter. But about 100 yards from the camp, something changed. The tracks got weird. Some of them stretched out longer than human steps could be. Others looked like they'd been made by claws instead of boots. And the strangest thing was the temperature. As I followed those tracks, it kept getting colder. Not just regular cold from the storm, but a bone-deep chill that seemed to come from the ground itself. My breath started forming ice crystals in my beard, and my fingers went numb even inside my insulated gloves. By the time I reached the old CCC shelter, I knew something was very wrong in Cranberry Wilderness. But I had no idea how wrong things were about to get. The shelter sat in a grove of dead pine trees, looking like something out of a nightmare. It was built from local stone back in the Depression, meant to house work crews building trails through the wilderness. Now it squatted in the snow like a tomb, with ice covering the windows and strange dark stains running down the walls. My flashlight beam died the moment I pointed it at the building. Brand new batteries, and it just went dead. I tried my backup light, same thing. The cold was so intense near the shelter that my breath turned to ice crystals before it left my mouth. I could hear something moving inside. Slow, heavy footsteps crossing the floor. Then a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. Someone chewing, wet, crunching sounds like someone biting through bones. The door hung open, creaking in the wind. I pulled out my service revolver and stepped inside. The smell hit me first, death and decay, but underneath that was something else, something that made my mouth water and my stomach growl, even though I'd eaten breakfast just hours ago. I'd never smelled anything like it, but somehow my body knew it was the smell of meat, fresh meat. In the corner of the shelter, I found Jennifer Walsh. At least, I found what was left of her. She was hanging from one of the ceiling beams, and something had been feeding on her. The cuts were surgical, precise, like someone who knew exactly how to butcher meat. Her face was frozen in a scream, but her eyes looked hungry. On the floor below her was another student, Michael Torres, according to his student ID. He was still alive, but barely. His lips and fingertips were black with frostbite, and there was blood around his mouth. When he saw me, he tried to speak, but his voice was just a whisper. "So hungry," he said. "Can't stop being hungry, even when I eat myself." That's when I saw his hands. 3 fingers on his left hand were gone, chewed down to the bone. Fresh blood was still dripping from the wounds. "Michael, I'm Ranger Ridgemont. I'm here to help you. Where are the others?" He pointed deeper into the shelter with one of his remaining fingers. "He took them. The tall man. He makes us hungry, and then he feeds on the hunger. He's been hungry for so long." A sound echoed from the back of the shelter. That wet, chewing noise again, but louder now. Mixed with it was something else, whispered voices, begging for food. I helped Michael to his feet, but he could barely stand. The hypothermia was shutting down his body, and whatever had happened to him here had broken something in his mind. "We need to get you out of here," I told him. "My radio's not working, but I can get you back to base camp." "No," he whispered. "He won't let us leave. He needs us. We're his food now." That's when I heard footsteps coming from the back room. But they weren't normal footsteps. They were too long, like something with legs longer than any human's. And between each step, I heard a scraping sound, like claws dragging across stone. I raised my gun toward the sound, but Michael grabbed my arm with what was left of his hand. "Don't look at his eyes," he said. "If you look at his eyes, you'll get hungry too. And once you're hungry, you can't stop eating." A shadow moved in the doorway to the back room. It was shaped like a person, but stretched out wrong. Too tall, too thin, like someone had taken a human being and pulled it like taffy. The shadow moved forward, and I caught my first glimpse of the thing that had destroyed these kids. It had been human once. I could see that in its face, even though the features were stretched and wrong. Its skin was gray-white, like old snow, and hung loose on its bones. But it was the eyes that made me understand what Michael meant. They were black holes in its skull, and when I looked at them, something twisted in my stomach. Suddenly, I was starving. Not just hungry, starving like I hadn't eaten in weeks. My mouth started watering, and I found myself looking at Michael differently. The blood around his mouth looked appetizing. The thought of warm meat made my hands shake. I forced myself to look away from the creature's eyes, and the hunger faded a little. But I could still feel it lurking in the back of my mind, like a wild animal waiting to break free. "Rebecca Ridgemont," the creature said, and its voice sounded like wind through broken trees. 9 years keeping people safe in these mountains. 47 rescues. But you can't rescue them from me. They're mine now. They fed me their hunger, and now I feed on them." It stepped fully into the room, and I saw how big it really was. 14 feet tall, maybe more, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its fingers ended in claws that looked like they could tear through steel. But the worst part was how it moved. Too fast. Not human fast. It was like watching a movie with frames missing. "I was like you once," it said, "trying to help people in these mountains. That was 1894. Bad winter. Got trapped in a mine shaft with my partner. Food ran out after 2 weeks. By the 3rd week, he was starting to look delicious." The creature smiled, showing teeth like broken glass. "But I learned something when I ate him. I learned that hunger is the most powerful force in the world. Stronger than love, stronger than fear. And when you feed hunger with human flesh, it grows. It becomes something else, something that can live forever. Michael collapsed beside me, his body finally giving up. The creature looked down at him with what might have been affection. He lasted longer than most. 3 days of feeding me his hunger before his mind broke. The girl only lasted 1 day. But you, Rebecca, you might last a week. I raised my gun and fired 6 shots center mass. The bullets hit the creature and passed right through, leaving holes that closed up like water. It didn't even slow down. Iron can't hurt me, it said. Fire might, but you don't have any fire up here in the snow. That's when I heard voices outside the shelter. My backup team had made it through the storm. Rangers Tom Hillcrest and Eddie Colemine, 2 mountain men who'd been working these peaks longer than I'd been alive. The creature heard them too, and its smile got wider. More food, it said. This is turning into a feast. Tom and Eddie came through the door with their guns drawn, but they stopped dead when they saw the creature. I'd worked with both men for years. Tom was a former Marine, steady as a rock in any crisis. Eddie had grown up hunting these mountains and could track a mouse through fresh snow. But when they saw that thing towering over us, they both went pale as winter. "Sweet Jesus," Tom whispered. "What is that thing?" The creature turned its attention to them, and I saw Tom's eyes go glassy when he met its gaze. His hand dropped to his side, and his mouth started hanging open. "Don't look at its eyes," I shouted, but it was too late for Tom. The hunger had him. Eddie was smarter. He kept his gaze fixed on the creature's chest and started backing toward the door. "Becca, we need to get out of here, now." The creature laughed, a sound like ice breaking. "You can run, little man, but I'll find you. I can smell your hunger from miles away. Everyone gets hungry eventually." Tom started walking toward the creature like he was hypnotized. His rifle clattered to the floor, and he began reaching into his pack. He pulled out a candy bar and started eating it, but his eyes never left the creature's face. "Tastes good, doesn't it?" the creature said. "But it's not enough. It's never enough. You need something more filling, something warm and red and screaming." Tom's head turned toward Eddie, and I saw the same hungry look in his eyes that Michael had. Eddie saw it too and raised his rifle. "Tom, snap out of it. It's me, Eddie." But Tom wasn't Tom anymore. The hunger had changed him. He lunged at Eddie with his bare hands, trying to bite his face. Eddie had to hit him with the rifle butt to knock him down. "We can't stay here," I told Eddie. "That thing's going to turn us all into cannibals." The creature moved toward us, but instead of attacking, it just stood there watching. Like it was enjoying the show. "Run, if you want," it said. "The storm will drive you back to me. Or the hunger will. It's growing in all of you now. In a few hours, you'll be tearing each other apart for a taste of warm blood." Eddie and I dragged the unconscious Tom out of the shelter and into the storm. The wind had gotten worse, and the snow was coming down so hard we could barely see 10 feet in any direction. But anything was better than being trapped in there with that thing. We found a small cave about a quarter mile from the shelter and hauled Tom inside. Eddie built a fire while I tried to raise someone on my radio, but all I got was static mixed with weird sounds. Howling that didn't come from any animal, and underneath it, whispered voices begging for food. Tom woke up around midnight, but he wasn't right. He kept staring at Eddie and me like we were hamburgers. The hunger was still in him, maybe stronger than before. "I can smell your blood," he said quietly. "It smells so good, just a little taste, you wouldn't even miss it." Eddie moved closer to the fire, putting distance between himself and Tom. "This is bad, Becca, really bad. We've got some kind of monster out there, and it's turning people into man-eaters." I'd been thinking the same thing. The old stories from these mountains weren't just stories, they were warnings. Warnings about something that lived in the high country and fed on human hunger. "We need to find the other students," I said. "If any of them are still alive, we have to try to save them." "What if we can't save them? What if they're like him now?" Eddie nodded toward Tom, who was gnawing on his own knuckles and staring at us with those hungry eyes. Before I could answer, Tom lunged at Eddie. But instead of trying to bite him, Tom ran straight toward the mouth of the cave. He moved like he was sleepwalking, his arms stretched out in front of him. "Tom, no!" I shouted, but he was already outside. Eddie and I rushed after him, but we were too late. Tom walked straight off a cliff about 50 yards from our cave. We heard his scream fade into the wind, then nothing. The creature, Eddie said, his voice shaking. It called him. Made him walk right off that cliff. That's when I realized the creature wasn't just hunting us. It was playing with us, making us watch our friends die. Feeding on our fear and desperation as much as our hunger. We went back to the cave, but Eddie was different now. He kept looking at me sideways, and I caught him licking his lips when he thought I wasn't watching. The hunger was spreading, just like the creature said it would. Around 3 a.m, Eddie made his move. I was half asleep when I heard him get up and start moving toward me. When I opened my eyes, he was standing over me with his hunting knife in his hand. "I'm sorry, Becca," he whispered, "but I'm so hungry, and you smell so good." I rolled out of the way just as his knife came down. The blade sparked off the stone where my head had been a second before. Eddie lunged at me again, but 9 years of mountain climbing had made me fast. I grabbed my ice axe and swung it hard. The pick end caught Eddie in the chest, right through his coat and into his heart. He looked down at the axe handle sticking out of his body, then back at me with confused eyes. "I was just hungry," he said, then fell over dead. I sat in that cave for the rest of the night, next to Eddie's body, listening to the storm rage outside. 2 good men were dead, and I was alone in the wilderness with a monster that could drive people insane with hunger just by looking at them. But somewhere out there, 2 college kids were still alive. The creature had mentioned that some of the group was still with it, and as long as there was a chance to save them, I had to try. When dawn broke gray and cold, I packed my gear and headed deeper into the wilderness, toward the old mining areas where the creature made its home, toward whatever was left of David Kim and Susan Martinez. I had my ice axe, some emergency flares, and the knowledge that fire was the only thing the creature feared. It wasn't much, but it would have to be enough, because I was the only one left who could bring those kids home. I found the entrance to the old mine around noon. The storm had finally started to break, but the temperature was still dropping. My breath froze in the air, and ice was forming on my eyelashes. The mine opening looked like a mouth in the mountainside, with icicles hanging down like teeth. The tracks led right inside, boot prints from the missing students, and those strange claw marks from the creature. But there were other tracks too, drag marks, like someone had been pulled into the mine against their will. I could hear voices echoing from deep inside the tunnels, crying and begging, and underneath it all, that wet chewing sound I'd heard in the shelter. Someone was still alive down there. I lit one of my emergency flares and stepped into the mine. The red light threw weird shadows on the tunnel walls, and I could see old mining equipment scattered around. Rusted pickaxes and broken carts from the days when men dug coal out of these mountains. The tunnel went back about 100 yards, then opened into a larger chamber. What I found there will haunt me for the rest of my life. David Kim and Susan Martinez were still alive, but barely. They were chained to the chamber wall with old mining chains, and parts of them were missing. Arms, legs, pieces of flesh cut away with surgical precision. But somehow they were still breathing, still conscious. The creature was there too, crouched in the center of the chamber like a giant spider. It had been feeding on them slowly, keeping them alive so their fear and hunger would stay fresh. "Rebecca," Susan whispered when she saw me. "Please help us. It's been eating us for days, but it won't let us die." David was in worse shape. Half his face was gone, eaten away, but his remaining eye tracked my movement. "Kill us," he said through ruined lips. "Please, just kill us." The creature turned to look at me, and I was careful to keep my eyes focused on its chest instead of its face. "You came back," it said, sounding pleased. "I was hoping you would. You're stronger than the others. Your hunger will last longer." "Let them go," I said, raising the flare. The creature flinched back from the red light. "Take me instead." It laughed that sound like breaking ice. "Oh, I'm taking you too. But first, let me tell you about hunger, real hunger, not the little pangs you feel when you miss lunch. I'm talking about the hunger that eats your soul. The hunger that makes you forget you were ever human." The creature stood up to its full height, and I could see the full horror of what it had become. Its body was stretched and twisted, held together by hunger and malice. It had been feeding on human flesh and human souls for 80 years, growing stronger with each victim. "I was a good man once," it said. "Henry Colmine." "Yes, related to your friend Eddie. This runs in families, you know, the hunger. It calls to us across generations. That explained why Eddie had been so quick to turn. The creature's influence was stronger on people with the right bloodline. I tried to resist at first, it continued, when I ate my partner in that mine shaft all those years ago. But once you taste human flesh, once you feed the hunger, it never goes away. It just gets bigger and stronger until it's all you are. I looked at David and Susan, barely alive on the chamber wall. I thought about Tom walking off that cliff and Eddie trying to kill me in the cave. This thing had to be stopped, no matter what it cost. You made one mistake, I told the creature, pulling out my remaining 3 flares. What's that? You brought me to your home. I lit all 3 flares at once and threw them at the wooden support beams holding up the tunnel roof. The old timber caught fire immediately, and the creature screamed as the flames spread. Fire! It howled. You don't understand. The mine will collapse. We'll all die. Good, I said, pulling out the stick of dynamite I'd taken from Eddie's pack. Every mountain rescue team carried emergency explosives for avalanche control. I lit the fuse with the burning timber and threw it as deep into the mine as I could. The creature lunged at me, moving with that impossible speed, but the fire made it clumsy. I swung my ice axe and caught it in the leg. The blade bit deep, and black blood sprayed across the chamber walls. It screamed again, a sound that made the whole mountain shake. Then the dynamite exploded. The ceiling came down in a roar of stone and timber. I threw myself over David and Susan, trying to protect them from the falling rocks. The creature was caught in the middle of the collapse, crushed under tons of mountain. But even as the rocks pinned it down, I could hear it laughing. You can't kill hunger, it said, its voice growing faint as the rocks covered it. Hunger is eternal, and this mountain is full of hungry people. The mine entrance sealed itself with fallen stone. We were buried alive, but at least the creature was trapped with us. I held David and Susan as they died from their injuries, whispering promises that help was coming, even though I knew no one would ever find us down here. That's when I heard something impossible. Voices calling from outside the collapsed mine. A rescue team, somehow finding us in the middle of nowhere. Light broke through the rocks, and I saw faces I recognized. Rangers from other districts, called in when Tom, Eddie, and I failed to report back. They dug us out, carried me down the mountain, and rushed me to a hospital in Charleston. The official report said it was an avalanche accident, 6 college students and 2 rangers dead from exposure. The mine collapse was listed as a natural cave-in caused by the storm. Nobody wanted to hear about monsters or cannibalism or hunger that could drive people insane. But I know the truth. And sometimes, on quiet nights, I still hear that creature's dying words echoing in my head. Hunger is eternal. They transferred me to the Everglades 6 months later, said I needed a change of scenery after what happened in the mountains. The official story was that I had survivor's guilt from losing so many people in the storm. They gave me a medal for trying to save those kids, and everyone said I was a hero. But I know better. I know I didn't save anyone. Not really. David Kim and Susan Martinez both died in the hospital. The doctor said it was from their injuries and exposure, but I saw their eyes before they passed. They still had that hungry look, even at the end. Like some part of the creature's curse stayed with them. I developed an eating disorder after the incident. I couldn't keep food down for months. Every time I tried to eat, I'd remember the smell in that mine, the sound of the creature feeding. My body rejected anything that might feed the hunger inside me. The Everglades are about as far from snowy mountains as you can get, but the change of scenery didn't help like they thought it would. Hot, humid swamps instead of cold, dry peaks. Alligators instead of bears. But the nightmares followed me south. I lasted 2 years in Florida before I retired early. Couldn't handle the isolation anymore, the constant feeling that something was watching me from the shadows. Every missing person case reminded me of those kids in Cranberry Wilderness. Every unexplained death made me wonder if the hunger was spreading. Because I know it didn't die in that mine collapse. The local newspapers in West Virginia still report strange disappearances in the Cranberry Wilderness. Hikers who go up the mountain and never come back down. Hunting parties that leave behind campsites torn apart from the inside, with blood frozen in spiral patterns. The mining area where we fought the creature is officially closed to the public. They say it's because of unstable ground conditions, but I know the real reason. Sometimes, on clear winter nights, people in the nearby towns report hearing sounds coming from the collapsed mine. howling that doesn't come from any animal, and underneath it, whispered voices begging for food. The creature was right about one thing: hunger is eternal, and mountains have long memories. I live in a small apartment in Miami now, where it's never cold and the sun shines almost every day. I work as a security guard at a shopping mall, the most normal job I could find. But I keep emergency flares in my car, and I never go anywhere without my old ice axe. Because someday, I know the hunger will find me again. It might not be the same creature. That thing is probably still trapped under tons of rock in that collapsed mine. But it said the hunger runs in families, that it calls across generations. And there are other mountains in the world, other dark places where starving things might be waiting. Sometimes I think about going back to Cranberry Wilderness, finishing what I started. But I'm 52 years old now, and those mountains belong to younger, stronger people. Rangers like I used to be, before I learned that some rescues can't be made and some hungers can't be satisfied. All I can do is tell my story and hope someone believes it. Hope that if another emergency beacon goes off in the high country during a winter storm, the rangers who respond will remember what I learned up there. Don't look into hungry eyes. Don't trust the hunger when it calls to you. And always carry fire. Because in the deepest, coldest places in the mountains, there are things that have been waiting a very long time for their next meal. And they're still waiting. Still hungry. The end. My name is Josh Hawthorne, and I've been a park ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 13 years. In all that time, I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Black bears getting into campsites, hikers falling off cliffs, the occasional drunk tourist thinking they could wrestle a raccoon. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened that August. It was hotter than hell that summer. The kind of heat that made your uniform stick to your skin and turned the mountain air thick as soup. We'd been in a drought for weeks, and the whole parkway felt different. Wrong, somehow. Even the regular bears were acting strange, coming down from the high country earlier than usual, looking spooked. I was finishing up my patrol near Rough Ridge when the radio crackled to life. Emergency call. Family attacked at the overlook. 1 dead, 2 missing. I'd handled bear attacks before. 34 problem bears relocated in my career, and I knew their patterns better than most. But when I got to the scene, nothing made sense. The victim was Robert Fleming, a guy from Charlotte who'd brought his family up for a weekend camping trip. What was left of him wasn't pretty. Deep gashes across his chest and back, like claw marks, but bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. The strangest part was the damage to the rocks around the overlook. Granite doesn't scratch easy, but something had scored those stones 8 feet off the ground, leaving gouges that looked almost deliberate. Never saw bear damage like this, I told Sheriff Morrison when he arrived. Figured it had to be a rogue black bear on steroids or something. But even as I said it, I didn't believe it. The blood trail led away from the parking area and down into the rhododendron thickets, but alongside it were tracks that made my skin crawl. They started off looking like bear prints, big ones, maybe 7 inches across, but then they changed. Halfway down the trail, they switched from 4 legs to 2, like whatever made them had stood up and walked away like a man. Helen Fleming and her 8-year-old daughter Amy were nowhere to be found. Their car was still there, keys in the ignition, Helen's purse sitting on the passenger seat with her wallet untouched. Whatever had taken them, it wasn't interested in money. I grabbed my gear, tranq gun, radio, first aid kit, and started following the trail. The heat was brutal, but I'd tracked bears through worse. What bothered me was the silence. Usually these mountains are alive with sound, birds calling, insects buzzing, squirrels chattering in the trees. But as I got deeper into the rhododendrons, everything went quiet. Even the flies stopped humming. That should have been my first real warning. Animals know things we don't. When every living creature in a forest decides to leave, you should probably listen. But I had a job to do. A mother and her little girl were out there somewhere, probably hurt, definitely scared. I'd been doing this work since I was 26, right after my divorce, when I needed something to focus on besides my own mess of a life. Helping people in these mountains was the one thing I was still good at. The blood trail wound deeper into the laurel hell. That's what we call the thick tangles of mountain laurel and rhododendron that grow so dense you can barely push through them. perfect place for a wounded animal to hide, or for something else to take its prey where nobody would think to look. I was about half a mile in when I found the first tree. A big oak, maybe 3 feet across, with bark stripped away in long, parallel lines. But these marks weren't at ground level where a bear would make them. They started about 12 feet up the trunk and went higher than I could see. I stood there, staring at those claw marks, feeling sweat that had nothing to do with the heat running down my back. In 13 years of tracking bears, I'd never seen territorial marking that high off the ground, and the marks themselves were too neat, too purposeful, like whatever made them was thinking about it. My radio crackled. "Josh, you find anything yet?" Following the trail, I radioed back, heading deeper into the thickets. "Something's not right down here, though." "What do you mean?" I looked around at the silent forest, at the impossible claw marks scoring the oak tree, at tracks that changed from animal to something else entirely. I think we're dealing with more than just a bear. The trail led me deeper into country. I knew better than my own backyard, but everything felt different now. Wrong. The rhododendron grew so thick it was like walking through a green tunnel, and the heat was trapped down there with nowhere to go. My shirt was soaked through, and I was drinking water faster than I should have been. About a mile in, I found Robert Fleming's body. He was lying in a small clearing where the bushes opened up around a fallen tree. The sight hit me like a punch to the gut, even though I'd seen my share of animal attack victims over the years. This was different, though. Worse. Whatever had killed him had done it with incredible force. His rib cage was crushed, and there were deep puncture wounds in his shoulders that went clean through to the other side. But the thing that made my hands shake as I called it in was the way his body was positioned. Not random, not like he'd fallen or been dragged. He was laid out carefully, arms crossed, like someone had arranged him that way, on purpose. "Base, this is Josh. Found the victim." I had to clear my throat twice to get the words out. He's dead. Sending coordinates now." "Copy that. What's your assessment?" I looked around the clearing again, noting details the way I'd been trained. No blood spray patterns, no signs of a struggle. The attack had happened somewhere else, and the body had been moved here. "Unknown large predator," I said into the radio. "Victim appears to have been transported post-mortem. I'm continuing to search for the missing persons." What I didn't say was that everything about this scene felt staged, like something had wanted me to find Robert Fleming, wanted me to see what it could do. The blood trail picked up again on the far side of the clearing, but it was different now. Less blood, more deliberate. Like whatever I was following knew exactly where it was going and wasn't in any hurry to get there. I'd been tracking for another hour when my GPS started acting up. The little screen flickered, showing impossible readings, like I was moving in circles even though I was walking in a straight line. The needle on my compass spun lazily, couldn't decide which way was north. "Must be all this iron in the rocks," I muttered. But I'd never had equipment problems like this before, not in 13 years of working these mountains. That's when I heard the voice. "Help me, please. Somebody help me." A woman's voice, weak and scared, coming from somewhere ahead through the trees. Had to be Helen Fleming. I picked up the pace, pushing through a particularly dense patch of laurel, following the sound. "Ma'am? Mrs. Fleming? This is Park Ranger Hawthorne. Can you hear me? Help. Down here. Can't move." The voice was clearer now, maybe 50 yards ahead. I could see a break in the trees, what looked like it might be another clearing. I moved faster, my gear bouncing against my hip. But as I got closer, something made me stop. The voice was coming from the right spot, saying the right things. But there was something off about it. Too clear, maybe. Too perfect. In 13 years of finding lost hikers, I'd never heard someone sound quite like that. I crept forward more carefully, using the trees for cover. The clearing ahead was bigger than the one where I'd found Robert Fleming, with a creek running through the middle of it. I could see someone lying near the water, a woman in hiking clothes, not moving. "Mrs. Fleming?" I called out, but quieter this time. No answer. The woman by the creek didn't move, didn't even seem to be breathing. That's when I saw it. Something huge and dark was crouched in the shadows on the far side of the clearing. At first I thought it was a bear, but then it stood up. Not the way a bear stands, on its hind legs for a better look around. This thing stood up like a man, smooth and easy, like standing on two legs was the most natural thing in the world. It was at least 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur that looked almost black in the shadows. Its arms were too long, reaching almost to its knees, and its hands, Jesus, its hands looked almost human. Fingers instead of claws, thumbs that could grab and hold things. But the worst part was its face. It wasn't a bear's face at all. It was something in between, like someone had taken a bear and tried to make it more human, or taken a human and made it more bear. And its eyes. Its eyes looked right at me with an intelligence that made my blood run cold. We stared at each other across that clearing for what felt like forever, but was probably only a few seconds. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, couldn't do anything but watch as this impossible thing tilted its head and studied me like I was some kind of interesting puzzle it was trying to figure out. Then it spoke. "Help me, please. Somebody help me." The same voice I'd been following, the same scared woman's voice, coming out of that nightmare face with perfect clarity. It was mimicking Helen Fleming, using her voice like a lure. My hand went for the tranq gun on my belt, but my fingers were shaking so bad I nearly dropped it. The thing watched me fumble with the safety, and I swear it looked amused. That's when it moved. I'd seen black bears run before, but this was something else entirely. It dropped to all fours and came at me through the trees faster than anything that big had a right to move. I got the tranq gun up and fired, but my hands were shaking so bad the dart went wide. I turned and ran. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, and it was gaining ground fast. The rhododendrons that had slowed me down all day didn't seem to bother it at all. I could hear branches breaking, could feel the ground shaking under its weight. Then everything went quiet again. I stopped running and looked back, gasping for breath. Nothing. No sound of pursuit, no movement in the trees. It was like the thing had just vanished. But I could feel it watching me. Somewhere in those shadows, something that could think and plan and mimic human voices was deciding what to do with me next. I keyed my radio with shaking fingers. "Base, this is Josh. I need backup. Now." "Copy that." "What's your situation?" I looked around at the silent forest, thinking about that impossible thing standing upright, thinking about the perfect mimicry of Helen Fleming's voice. "Unknown predator," I said finally, "larger than initially assessed. Request immediate backup and additional tranquilizer equipment." What I didn't say was that I wasn't sure any amount of backup would be enough. 2 hours later, I was back at the trailhead with Maria Santos and Carl Pittman. Maria was a fellow ranger who'd transferred from Yellowstone the year before, tough as nails and good in a crisis. Carl was state wildlife, called in when we had problem bears that needed more than standard relocation. I'd tried to explain what I'd seen, but the words sounded crazy even to me. An 8-foot bear that walked upright and could mimic voices. They listened, took notes, nodded in all the right places. But I could see it in their eyes. They thought the heat and stress had gotten to me. "Probably a large male black bear," Carl said as he checked his rifle. "Real bullets, not tranq darts. Maybe 450 pounds. When they rear up on their hind legs, they can look a lot bigger than they really are." "I've been tracking bears for 13 years, I said. "This wasn't a bear." Maria put her hand on my shoulder. "Josh, you found a body today. That's rough on anyone. Sometimes our minds try to make sense of things by embellishing details." They were humoring me. I could see it in the way they exchanged glances, the way they double-checked their equipment like they were dealing with a spooked rookie instead of an experienced ranger. We went back in as a team, following the same trail I'd taken earlier. The blood sign was still there, the impossible claw marks on the trees, the tracks that changed from 4 legs to 2. But in the afternoon heat, with backup beside me and proper weapons, it all seemed less threatening somehow. We found the clearing where I'd seen the thing. Helen Fleming was there, alive but unconscious, lying by the creek just like I'd remembered. But there was no sign of whatever had been watching me from the shadows. Carl checked her pulse while Maria covered the tree line. "She's alive, but she's been through hell. Dehydrated, some scratches and bruises, but nothing that looks life-threatening." I knelt down beside him. "What about her daughter, Amy?" "No sign of the kid yet," Carl said. "But if this woman's alive, maybe the little girl is too." We got Helen stabilized and called for a medical evacuation. While we waited for the helicopter, she started to come around, mumbling words that didn't make sense at first. "The bear," she whispered, grabbing my sleeve with surprising strength. It talked to me." Maria and Carl exchanged another look. "Heat exhaustion," they were thinking. "Trauma-induced hallucinations." But I leaned closer, What did it say? It knew my name, knew Amy's name. It spoke with my husband's voice. Her eyes went wide, remembering. Oh God, where's Amy? Where's my baby? That's when we heard the scream. High-pitched, terrified, definitely a child. Coming from deeper in the forest, maybe half a mile away through the thickest part of the laurel hell. Amy. Helen tried to sit up, but she was too weak. Carl was already moving. I'll find her. You two stay with the woman. Wait, I called after him, but he was already pushing through the undergrowth, following the sound of the screaming child. The screaming stopped. We waited, straining our ears for any sound, Carl calling out movement in the trees, anything. The forest had gone silent again, that same unnatural quiet that had bothered me all day. Carl, Maria called into her radio. Report your status. Nothing. Carl, respond. Static. I looked at Maria, saw my own fear reflected in her eyes. We need to go after him. What about Helen? The helicopter was still 10 minutes out. Helen Fleming was stable but weak, in no condition to be left alone. But Carl was out there somewhere. And that scream. It was a trap, I said quietly. The screaming. It wasn't Amy. Maria stared at me. What are you talking about? The thing I saw earlier. It can mimic voices perfectly. It used Helen's voice to lure me into that clearing. Now it's using a child's scream to separate us. Before Maria could respond, we heard Carl's voice calling from the forest. Found her. Found the girl. She's alive but hurt. Need medical assistance. Maria grabbed her pack. That's Carl. He found Amy. But something was wrong with his voice. Too clear, too perfect. Just like Helen's voice had been. Don't. I grabbed her arm. That's not Carl. Josh. What the hell? Carl's scream cut through the air, high and agonized and very, very real. It went on for maybe 5 seconds, then cut off abruptly. We stared at each other in the sudden silence. Radio the helicopter, I said quietly. Tell them to bring more backup. A lot more backup. That's when we heard footsteps coming through the trees toward our clearing. Heavy, deliberate steps that didn't try to be quiet. Something was walking toward us, taking its time. Found her. Found the girl. Carl's voice again, but he was dead. I was sure of it now. Whatever was out there had killed him, and was using his voice to try to lure us away from Helen Fleming. Maria had her service weapon out, a .40 caliber that would stop a man but might just make a large bear angry. I chambered around in my tranq gun, knowing it would be useless if I was right about what we were facing. She's alive but hurt. Need medical assistance. The voice was closer now, maybe 30 yards away through the trees. But I could see movement in the shadows. And whatever was making Carl's voice was a lot bigger than Carl had been. Josh, Maria whispered, what the hell is out there? The footsteps stopped just outside the clearing. We could hear breathing, heavy and slow, like something big was trying to be quiet. Then, in perfect mimicry of my own voice, it called out, Maria, Helen, where are you? I think Carl's hurt. Need you to come help me move him. Hearing my own voice used against me was like ice water in my veins. This thing had been listening to us, learning our voices, studying how we talk to each other. It's hunting us, I whispered. It's been hunting us all day. The helicopter's rotors were finally audible in the distance, but they were still minutes away. Too far to help if this thing decided to attack. In the trees around us, branches started to creak and sway. Not from wind. There was no wind. Something big was moving through the canopy above our heads, circling the clearing like a predator sizing up its prey. Helen Fleming stirred, opening her eyes just enough to focus on my face. It has Amy, she whispered. It took her to show me what it could do. It's coming back for all of us. The helicopter was getting closer, but so was the thing in the trees. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen soon. And I was finally starting to understand that my tranq gun and Maria's pistol weren't going to be nearly enough. The helicopter landed in a whirlwind of dust and noise, and for a moment I thought we might actually get out of this. The EMTs got Helen loaded onto a stretcher while Maria and I briefed the pilot about Carl's disappearance. But as the chopper lifted off with Helen aboard, taking our only witness to safety, I realized we were more alone than ever. We need to find Carl, Maria said, checking her weapon again. We need to get out of here, I replied. Call for backup, get a full search team with proper equipment. But even as I said it, I knew we couldn't just leave. Carl was still out there somewhere, probably hurt, maybe dying. And Amy Fleming. If there was any chance that 8-year-old girl was still alive, we had to try. We followed Carl's trail into the deepest part of the rhododendron hell, where the plants grew so thick they formed a natural tunnel barely wide enough for one person. The perfect place for an ambush. We found Carl about 200 yards from where we'd last heard his voice. What was left of him was scattered across a small open space between the trees. His head had been torn completely from his body and placed carefully on a fallen log, facing back toward the trail. His rifle was bent in half, twisted like a piece of wire. Maria threw up. I just stood there, staring, trying to process the impossible strength it would take to do something like that to a human being. "We're leaving," Maria said, wiping her mouth. "Right now. This is beyond anything we can handle." But before we could move, we heard Amy Fleming's voice calling from deeper in the forest. "Help me, please help me, I'm scared." The same perfect mimicry, but this time it was a child's voice. Terrified, helpless, exactly the kind of sound that would make any decent person come running. "It's not her," I said. "Amy's dead." "Has to be." But Maria was already moving toward the sound. What if it's not? What if she's really alive and we just walk away? That was the thing about this creature. It understood exactly how to manipulate us. It knew we couldn't ignore a child's cry for help, even if we suspected it was a trap. We followed the voice through terrain that got rougher and more isolated with every step. The thing was leading us away from any hope of quick rescue, away from the trails and into the deep wilderness where no one would think to look for our bodies. Finally, we came to a cliff face that rose maybe 60 feet straight up. At the base was a cave opening, dark and narrow, barely visible behind a curtain of hanging vines. "Help me, I'm in here. Please don't leave me." Amy's voice, coming from inside the cave. "This is it," I said. "This is where it lives." Maria played her flashlight beam across the cave entrance. The walls were covered in claw marks, deep gouges in the stone that formed almost a decorative pattern, and scattered around the opening were bones, deer, bear, and some that looked disturbingly human. "We go in there, we don't come out," I said, but Maria was already moving toward the cave. I can't walk away from a child. That's when the creature made its mistake. It got impatient. Amy's voice came from inside the cave again, but this time it overlapped with the same voice calling from behind us. The thing had tried to use the same mimicry trick from 2 different directions at once, and the illusion shattered. "Run," I said. The creature came out of the cave like a bullet from a gun. In the daylight, I could see it clearly for the first time. 8 feet tall, covered in dark fur, but its proportions were all wrong. Arms too long, hands too human, face that was somewhere between bear and something else entirely. And its eyes. God, its eyes were the worst part. They looked at us with complete intelligence, like it was solving a puzzle or planning our deaths step by step. Maria got her gun up first, put 3 rounds center mass. The bullets hit. I saw the creature flinch, but they didn't slow it down much. It swatted her aside like she weighed nothing, and I heard bones break when she hit the rocks. My tranq gun was useless, but I fired anyway. The dart bounced off the creature's chest like I'd thrown a toothpick at it. Then it turned those intelligent eyes on me, and I realized it had been saving me for last. This whole thing had been about me, luring me into its territory, showing me what it could do, proving it was smarter and stronger than anything I'd ever faced. It stood there for a moment, studying me, and then it did something that made my blood freeze. It smiled. Not an animal expression, but a human smile, full of malice and anticipation. "Josh," it said in my own voice, "you should have stayed home today." That's when I understood what this thing really was. Not just some large predator, not even some unknown species of animal. This was something that had once been human, or had been made from something human. The intelligence in its eyes, the way it could perfectly mimic voices, the deliberate cruelty of its actions, it started toward me, moving slowly now because it knew I had nowhere to run. The cliff was behind me. The cave was to my left, and thick forest was to my right. I was trapped, and it was going to take its time. But Maria wasn't dead yet. She dragged herself behind a boulder, and somehow she still had her weapon. Her first shot missed, but the second one caught the creature in the shoulder, spinning it around. "The cave!" she yelled. "There's something in the cave." I looked past the creature and saw what she meant. Deep inside the cave opening, almost invisible in the shadows, something was moving. something small. Amy Fleming was alive. The creature saw where I was looking and let out a roar that shook dust from the cliff face. It turned back toward the cave, probably deciding to finish off the child before dealing with us. I couldn't let that happen. This thing had already killed her father and traumatized her mother. I wasn't going to let it take an 8-year-old girl. I charged it. Not the smartest move I've ever made, but sometimes you don't have time to think. I hit the creature low and hard, right in the knees, trying to bring it down. It was like running into a tree. The impact sent me sprawling, but it staggered the creature just enough to give Amy time to run out of the cave. She was hurt, limping badly, but she was alive and conscious. "Behind you," she screamed. I rolled aside just as massive claws raked the ground where I'd been lying. The creature was done playing games. It grabbed me by the shirt and lifted me off the ground like I weighed nothing. I was looking into those intelligent, malevolent eyes from maybe 6 inches away when Maria emptied her clip into the thing's back. It dropped me and spun around, roaring in pain and rage. Some of those bullets had done real damage. I could see dark blood matting its fur. But it was still standing, still fighting, and we were out of ammunition. The creature looked at Maria, then at me, then at Amy cowering behind a rock. It was deciding which one of us to kill first. That's when Amy Fleming did something that probably saved all our lives. She picked up a burning stick from an old campfire hidden behind the rocks and threw it right at the creature's face. The reaction was immediate and violent. The thing screamed and stumbled backward, clawing at its eyes, absolutely terrified of the fire. Not just avoiding it the way most animals would, but panicking like fire was its worst nightmare. "It's afraid," I said. "It's afraid of fire." Maria understood immediately. She grabbed more sticks from the old fire pit, lit them with her emergency lighter, and started advancing on the creature. The thing backed toward the cliff, still clawing at its face, making sounds I'd never heard any animal make. Not roars anymore, but something almost like human screaming. For just a moment, holding that burning stick, Maria had it cornered. But cornered animals are dangerous, and this was more than just an animal. The creature stopped retreating and looked at us with those terrifying, intelligent eyes. Then it did something impossible. It started climbing the sheer cliff face. Not like a bear would climb, using its claws to find purchase in cracks and ledges. This thing went up that 60-foot cliff like it was walking on level ground, its human-like hands finding holds that shouldn't have been there. In seconds, it was at the top, looking down at us with what I swear was amusement. Then it disappeared into the forest above, leaving us alone with the echo of its laughter. 3 days later, I was sitting in a government office in Asheville, filling out paperwork that would never see the light of day. The official report listed Carl Pittman's death as a bear attack. The area around Grandfather Mountain was temporarily closed for enhanced wildlife management protocols. Amy Fleming was in the hospital, recovering from exposure and minor injuries. She'd been in the creature's cave for almost 2 days, kept alive for reasons I didn't want to think about too hard. The doctor said she was suffering from severe trauma and kept talking about a large bear that could talk like people. Her mother, Helen, had been transferred to a psychiatric facility in Charlotte. The official diagnosis was stress-induced psychosis brought on by witnessing her husband's death. She kept insisting that the bear had spoken to her, that it had known their names, that it was still out there waiting for them. They were both telling the truth, but truth wasn't something the government wanted to hear. The man across the desk from me wore a suit that probably cost more than I made in a month. He claimed to be from the Department of Agriculture, but everything about him screamed military. "Ranger Hawthorne," he said, reading from my file, "you've had an exemplary career up to this point. 13 years of service, excellent performance reviews, expert marksman qualification. It would be a shame to see that record tarnished by stress-related inconsistencies in your final report." The message was clear. Play along with the cover story, or find a new career. "What about Maria Santos?" I asked. She saw it too. Ranger Santos has been transferred to a position in Alaska. She understands the importance of maintaining consistent documentation standards. I signed the papers. What choice did I have? Who was going to believe a story about an 8-foot intelligent creature that could perfectly mimic human voices? Even I had trouble believing it, and I'd seen the thing with my own eyes. But that night, alone in my cabin with a bottle of bourbon, I did some research on my personal computer. I dug through old newspaper archives, police reports, missing person cases going back decades. What I found kept me up until dawn. Disappearances in remote sections of the Blue Ridge Parkway going back to the 1,950 seconds. Families vanishing completely, their campsites found days later with signs of incredible violence, but no bodies. Hikers reporting encounters with unusual bears that displayed aggressive and intelligent behavior. And buried deep in a digitized file from 1953, a military report about something called Project Deep Forest. An experiment in biological enhancement conducted at a facility near Grandfather Mountain. The project was officially terminated due to uncontrollable subject behavior and facility breach. The dates matched up perfectly. I never found out what exactly they'd tried to create in that government lab, but I had a pretty good idea of what had escaped. Something that was part animal, part human, and completely beyond anyone's ability to control. The Blue Ridge Parkway reopened 2 weeks later. Increased ranger patrols, they said. Enhanced safety protocols. But I knew better. They were just hoping the creature would stay deep in the wilderness and stick to killing the occasional hiker instead of entire families. I kept working my section of the parkway for another 6 months, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. Every shadow in the forest could be hiding something impossible. Every snapped branch could be a sign that the creature was back. I started drinking too much, sleeping too little, jumping at sounds that turned out to be nothing but wind in the trees. My ex-wife filed for full custody of our kids, said I was unstable, potentially dangerous. The court agreed. Maybe they were right. I quit the Park Service on a cold morning in February, turned in my badge and my weapon to a supervisor who seemed relieved to see me go. Word had gotten around about what had happened on Grandfather Mountain, even if the official story was bullshit. Now I work private security for a mall in Charlotte. It's honest work, but every day I wonder what's happening up in those mountains. Helen Fleming still calls me sometimes, when she's having one of her bad days. The doctors have her on medication that's supposed to help with the hallucinations, but she knows what she saw. Amy's doing better. Her grandmother moved her out to California, far from the mountains and the memories, but sometimes, late at night, she calls and tells me about the dreams. Dreams about a creature that knows her name, that can sound like her father when it wants to, that's still waiting for her to come back to the mountains. I tell her it was just trauma, that the bear is gone, that she's safe now, but I don't believe it any more than she does. 3 weeks ago, a family of 4 disappeared from a campground near Rough Ridge. Their car was found with the keys still in the ignition, food still warm on their camping stove. No signs of struggle, no bodies, no trail to follow. The official report blamed it on bears. But I know better. I know it's still out there, still hunting, still smart enough to stay hidden from the search teams and the government men in their expensive suits. Sometimes I think about going back up there, trying to find it, maybe finishing what we started. But I'm older now, out of shape, and I know I wouldn't stand a chance alone. So, I stay in Charlotte, working my security rounds, trying not to think about the families that drive up to the mountains every weekend, trying not to wonder which one of them might not make it back down. The beast of Blue Ridge is still up there, somewhere in the deep forest where the rhododendrons grow thick and the granite cliffs rise toward the sky. Still learning, still hunting, still perfectly capable of using your own voice to call you into the darkness. If you ever find yourself hiking alone in the remote sections of the Blue Ridge Parkway and you hear someone calling your name from the forest, don't follow that voice. No matter how much it sounds like someone you know, no matter how much they seem to need your help, just keep walking and don't look back. Because some things are better left undisturbed in the mountains, and some voices are never meant to be answered. My name is Angela Stormwind, but everyone calls me Angie. I've been a park ranger at Mount Mitchell for 7 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, lost hikers, sudden storms that could kill you if you weren't careful. But I was wrong about knowing everything. Mount Mitchell is the highest peak east of the Mississippi River. At 6,684 feet, it gets cold fast when the sun goes down, especially in October. The trees up here are different too. Mostly Fraser firs that look like Christmas trees, all dark and pointed against the sky. When the fog rolls in, which it does a lot, you can barely see 10 feet in front of you. I love this job. even when it's hard. My grandmother was Cherokee, and she used to tell me stories about these mountains. Most of them were just tales to keep kids from wandering off alone, but they always felt real to me. Maybe that's why I felt at home up here, even when the wind howled through the trees at night. It started 3 days ago. Jimmy and his maintenance crew came to me looking worried. Jimmy's been working these mountains for 15 years, and nothing much bothers him. "Angie, we got a problem," he said, pulling off his work gloves. "Someone's been screaming for help up near the summit, 3 nights in a row now, right around midnight." "Screaming?" I asked. "What kind of screaming?" "A woman. Sounds like she's hurt bad, crying for help. But when we go up there with flashlights, we can't find nobody." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Could be a lost hiker. People get turned around easy in the dark. That's what we thought first night, but Angie, we searched everywhere. No tracks, no camping gear, nothing. Just trees and rocks. Jimmy showed me where they heard the sounds, a clearing near the weather station, about a 1/4 mile from the summit. The trees formed a perfect circle around a flat area covered in granite stones. I'd been up there hundreds of times, but something felt different now. "I'll check it out tonight," I told him. "Probably just sound carrying funny off the rocks." But I didn't really believe that. My grandmother always said the mountains remembered things. Old pain, old fear, old anger. She told me about something called Spearfinger, a witch with stone claws that hunted people in these hills long ago. Just stories, I always figured. Tales to keep kids close to home. That afternoon, I hiked up to the clearing in daylight. Everything looked normal at first. Fraser firs grew thick around the edges, their dark branches reaching toward the center like gnarled fingers. The granite rocks were scattered around like giants' teeth. Then I saw the marks, deep gouges in the bark of the trees, running in straight lines like someone had dragged knives down the wood. But these cuts were too clean, too precise. And they were fresh, sap still bleeding from the wounds. I touched one of the gouges with my finger. The cut went deep into the tree, deeper than any knife could reach. The edges felt smooth, like glass. Or stone. "Just vandals," I said out loud, trying to convince myself. But vandals would need power tools to make cuts like this, and I would have heard machinery up here. The sun was getting low, turning the mountain air cold. I needed to head back down before dark, but something made me look closer at the granite rocks. They weren't just scattered randomly like I first thought. They were arranged in a pattern, a perfect spiral leading toward the center of the clearing. In the middle of the spiral sat one large stone, flat on top like a table. Dark stains covered its surface, too old to be fresh blood, but too dark to be rainwater. I pulled out my radio to call Jimmy, but got only static. The weather station was just a few hundred yards away, but somehow I couldn't get a signal. That never happened before. Walking back down the trail, I kept feeling like something was watching me from the trees. Every few steps, I'd turn around, but saw nothing except shadows and fog starting to creep between the branches. By the time I reached the ranger station, full dark had settled over the mountain. I wrote up my report, noting the strange cuts in the trees and the arranged stones. Probably just coincidence, I told myself. Maybe the rocks had always been that way, and I just never noticed. But deep down, I knew something was wrong on Mount Mitchell. Something that made the air taste different and the shadows move when they should have been still. My grandmother's stories didn't seem so silly anymore. That night, lying in my bunk at the station, I listened to the wind in the fir trees and thought about Spearfinger. In the old tales, she looked like a regular woman until she got close enough to touch you. Then her finger would stretch out long and sharp as a stone blade, reaching right through your chest to steal your liver. Just stories, I kept telling myself. But stories had to start somewhere. At 11:45, I was still awake when I heard it. A woman's voice, high and desperate, calling from somewhere up the mountain. "Help me, please, somebody help me." The screaming cut through the night like a knife. I grabbed my flashlight and radio, pulled on my boots, and headed up the trail. The voice came from the clearing, just like Jimmy said it would. "Help, I'm hurt, please." It sounded like a young woman, maybe in her 20s. The kind of voice that made you want to run toward it, not away. I moved as fast as I could on the dark trail, my flashlight beam jumping between the trees. "I'm coming," I shouted. "Keep calling so I can find you." But the screaming stopped the second I answered. Complete silence except for my boots crunching on fallen pine needles and my own breathing in the thin mountain air. I reached the clearing in 10 minutes. My flashlight swept across the space, lighting up the circle of granite stones and the dark fir trees beyond. Nothing moved. No one was there. "Hello?" I called. "Where are you?" No answer. I walked around the entire clearing, checking behind every tree and rock. The ground was soft enough to show footprints, but I only found my own tracks from that afternoon. Then I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The tree with the fresh gouges in its bark. The cuts were deeper now. What had been finger-deep scratches in daylight now looked like claw marks that went halfway through the trunk. I touched the bark again. Still bleeding sap, but the cuts felt different. Wider, rougher, like whatever made them was getting stronger. My radio crackled to life. "Angie, you copy?" Jimmy's voice. I nearly jumped out of my skin. "Yeah, I'm here, up at the clearing, no sign of anyone. You hear the screaming?" Loud and clear, but whoever it was, they're gone now. A long pause. Then Jimmy said, "Angie, I'm looking at the security monitors down here. You're the only person on that mountain." I felt cold all over. "What do you mean?" "I mean the motion sensors haven't picked up nobody else all night, just you, heading up the trail." I stared at the dark trees around me. "Jimmy, I heard a woman screaming for help, clear as day." "I believe you heard something, but it wasn't no regular person." After I got back down, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those tree cuts getting deeper, about the stones arranged in a spiral, about security sensors that could track a squirrel but somehow missed a screaming woman. The next morning, I hiked back up to look around in daylight. That's when I found Linda Morrison. I almost stepped on her before I saw her. What was left of Linda lay in a pile of dead leaves, about 50 yards from the clearing. Her driver's license was still in her jacket pocket. Linda Morrison, age 26, from Asheville. She'd been reported missing 6 months ago while hiking alone on Mount Mitchell. But Linda Morrison hadn't been killed by a bear or a fall. Something had punched neat holes through her ribs, like someone stuck pencils through her chest. Her liver was gone, removed so cleanly it looked like surgery. I called it in and waited for the state police. While I sat there watching Linda's remains, I noticed the trees around her were wrong too. The bark was black in perfect circles, like someone had held torches against the wood. But there was no smell of burning, and the blackened areas felt cold to the touch. The police took pictures and statements and finally loaded Linda into a body bag. The coroner said it looked like an animal attack, maybe a bear with unusual claw patterns. But I'd seen bear kills before. This wasn't a bear. That night, the screaming came again. Same time, same place, same desperate voice calling for help. This time, I didn't go up alone. Jimmy met me at the trailhead with his deer rifle and a big flashlight. "You sure about this?" he asked. "Someone's up there," I said. "Even if Linda Morrison wasn't the one screaming, somebody else needs help." We hiked up together, following the voice. It led us right to the clearing again, then stopped the moment we arrived. Jimmy played his light over every inch of the area while I checked the tree line. "Angie," Jimmy called. His voice sounded funny. "Come look at this." He was standing by the spiral of stones, shining his light on the flat rock in the center. The dark stains I'd seen before were fresh now, wet, red. "That's blood," Jimmy whispered. "Fresh blood," I agreed. "But from what?" That's when we heard footsteps in the trees. Slow, careful steps like someone trying to sneak up on us. Jimmy raised his rifle, and I pulled out my pistol. "Who's there?" I shouted. "This is a restricted area." The footsteps stopped. Then a woman's voice came from the darkness, but not the same voice we'd heard screaming. This one was older, rougher. "You looking for someone, honey?" An old woman stepped into our flashlight beams. She looked like a hiker, gray hair under a knitted cap, heavy coat, worn boots, but something felt wrong about her. She moved too smoothly for someone her age, and her eyes reflected our lights like an animal's. "We heard someone calling for help," I said, keeping my gun ready. The old woman smiled, and her teeth looked too sharp. "That was me, dear. I got turned around in the dark. Been wandering these woods for hours." "Are you hurt?" Jimmy asked. He'd lowered his rifle, but kept it ready. "Just tired. So very tired." She took a step closer. "Could you young folks help an old woman get back to the trail?" I wanted to help her. Every instinct said to put away the gun and offer her water and assistance, but my grandmother's voice echoed in my head. warning about strangers in the mountains who weren't what they seemed. "Sure," I said, "but let's all head down together. It's not safe up here at night." The old woman's smile got wider. "Oh, but I like it up here, especially at night. The hunting is so much better." That's when I saw her finger. Her right index finger was stretching out, getting longer and thinner. The tip was sharp as a stone blade, and it gleamed in our flashlight beams. "Jimmy, run!" I screamed. Jimmy's rifle went off, the sound echoing through the mountains like thunder. The bullet hit the old woman's center mass, but she didn't fall. She didn't even stagger. She just kept smiling with those two sharp teeth. "That wasn't very nice," she said, her voice changing, getting deeper, rougher, like rocks grinding against each other. Her finger had stretched out 3 feet now, thin as a pencil but hard as granite. She swept it sideways and caught Jimmy across the chest. His rifle flew from his hands as he stumbled backward. "Jimmy!" I emptied my pistol at her, 6 shots that should have dropped an elephant. The bullets hit her and bounced off like she was made of stone. Because she was made of stone, the old woman's disguise was falling away like a shed skin. Underneath was something 7 feet tall, with gray skin that looked like granite. Her finger claws clicked together as she moved, and her eyes glowed yellow in the dark. This was Spearfinger, the thing from my grandmother's stories, the creature that hunted people in these mountains for hundreds of years. And it was real. Jimmy was on the ground, clutching his chest. Blood seeped between his fingers where the stone claw had cut him. "Go," he gasped. "Get out of here." I wanted to help him, but Spearfinger was already moving toward us with that smooth, too-fast glide. I grabbed Jimmy under the arms and tried to drag him toward the trail, but he was too heavy, and the creature was too close. "Leave me," Jimmy said. "Radio for help." Spearfinger reached us then, her stone finger stretched out again, longer than before, seeking Jimmy's chest. I threw myself between them, but she just swatted me aside like a fly. I hit a tree hard enough to see stars. When my vision cleared, Jimmy was dead. Spearfinger had driven her stone finger right through his heart and out his back. She was already working on him with her other claws, opening him up to get at his liver. I ran. God help me. I left Jimmy's body and ran down that mountain as fast as my legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear Spearfinger feeding, making wet, tearing sounds that would haunt my dreams forever. The radio worked fine once I got away from the clearing. State police and paramedics came up at dawn, but all they found was what Spearfinger had left of Jimmy. The coroner ruled it an animal attack, same as Linda Morrison, but I knew better. And I knew it wasn't over. The next day, they found Carol Brennan, day hiker from Charlotte, missing for 2 weeks. Same wounds as the others. Precise holes through the ribs, liver removed with surgical skill. She'd been left in another ring of blackened trees, like the mountain itself was marking Spearfinger's kills. I tried to tell the police what really happened. Showed them the stone arrangements, the claw marks in the trees, explained about the creature. They listened politely and suggested I take some time off. Trauma from finding bodies, they said. Post-traumatic stress. Maybe they were right about the stress, but they were wrong about the creature. Spearfinger was real, and she was still hunting. 3 days later, Stephen Lee disappeared. College student from Boone, up here doing research on mountain ecology. His car was still in the parking lot, his camping gear still in his tent. But Stephen was gone. I found him that night, during the screaming, because that's what Spearfinger did. She used the voices of her victims to lure new prey. The desperate calls for help that drew people like me up the mountain in the dark. Linda Morrison's voice, then Carol Brennan's, now Stephen Lee's. I went up alone this time, armed with everything I could carry. My backup pistol, Jimmy's rifle, a shotgun from the station, and my grandmother's old hunting knife. The blade was made from Cherokee flint, blessed in the old ways. If regular bullets couldn't stop Spearfinger, maybe the old magic could. Stephen was still alive when I found him, barely. Spearfinger had him strung up in the clearing, hanging from the trees by stone spikes through his wrists. She was taking her time with him, keeping him fresh until she was ready to feed. "Help," Stephen whispered when he saw me. Blood ran down his arms from where the stone spikes held him. "Please help me." Spearfinger stepped out from behind a tree, wearing Stephen's face now. Perfect mimicry, except for the yellow eyes and the two sharp teeth. "Hello again, Ranger," she said in Stephen's voice. "Come to join your friends?" "Let him go," I said, raising the shotgun. Your fights with me? Spearfinger laughed, a sound like gravel in a blender. Oh, I don't fight, little ranger. I hunt, I feed. I've been feeding in these mountains since your people first came here. Cherokee, settlers, tourists, all the same to me, all just meat. She moved toward Stephen, her finger claws extending. I fired the shotgun, buckshot that should have taken her head off. She caught the pellets in midair and crushed them to dust. Iron and lead, she said. Modern weapons for modern prey. But I am older than your metals, child. Older than your roads and your cities and your foolish lights. Stephen screamed as her claws found his liver. The sound echoed off the mountains, carrying down the trails where other hikers might hear it. More bait for Spearfinger's trap. I dropped the shotgun and pulled out my grandmother's flint knife. The blade felt warm in my hand, like it remembered the old battles against things like this. Cherokee steel, I said, older than your hunger. Spearfinger's yellow eyes fixed on the knife. For the first time, she looked uncertain. That blade knows my name, she whispered. My grandmother told me your name, told me how to fight you. I was lying. My grandmother's stories never included instructions for killing Spearfinger. They were just warnings to stay away from the deep mountains, to travel in groups, to never follow voices in the dark. But Spearfinger believed me. She released Stephen and turned her full attention my way. Her stone claws scraped together as she moved, throwing sparks in the darkness. Show me then, little Cherokee. Show me what your grandmother taught you. Spearfinger circled me like a wolf, her stone claws clicking with each step. Stephen hung motionless from the trees, unconscious but still breathing. I had maybe minutes before he bled to death. Your grandmother knew me, Spearfinger said, her voice shifting between the old woman's and something deeper, older. All the Cherokee women knew me. They left offerings on the stone altars, told their children stories to keep them away from my hunting grounds. The stories said you could be killed. I lied, hoping she couldn't tell. Stories, she laughed again. Stories change with each telling. Truth gets lost, but I remain the same. She lunged at me, faster than anything that size should move. I rolled aside and her claws sparked off the granite rocks where I'd been standing. The flint knife felt hot in my hand now, almost burning. The Cherokee knew my weakness, I said, trying to keep her talking while I figured out how to save Stephen. Running water. You can't cross running water. Spearfinger's eyes narrowed. Clever girl. Yes, the flowing streams burn me like acid, but we're far from water here, aren't we? She was right. The nearest creek was half a mile down the mountain. But wait. The weather station had emergency supplies, water tanks for fighting fires. If I could get there. They also knew about salt, I said, backing toward the trail that led to the weather station. Salt circles trap creatures like you. Salt. Spearfinger spat, the sound like rocks breaking. Painful but not deadly. You're grasping at shadows, little ranger. She came at me again, all 7 feet of granite fury. This time I couldn't dodge fast enough. Her claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my jacket like paper. The wounds burned like ice. Blood ran down my arm, but the flint knife was glowing now, actually glowing with soft blue light. My grandmother's blessing was still on the blade, even after all these years. I slashed at Spearfinger's reaching claws. The flint edge met stone finger, and both rang like bells. She jerked back, with a shriek of pain and rage. Impossible. Your modern metal cannot hurt me. Not modern metal, I gasped, clutching my wounded shoulder. Old stone, Cherokee flint blessed in the ancient ways. For the first time, Spearfinger looked genuinely afraid. She stared at the cut on her finger claw, watching as dark ichor leaked from the wound. You cannot kill me with one small blade, she snarled. I am stone eternal. I am hunger that never dies. Maybe, but I can hurt you, and that means I can stop you. I turned and ran for the weather station. Behind me, Spearfinger roared and gave chase. Her stone feet pounded the earth like hammers, getting closer with each step. The weather station sat on a rocky outcrop 50 yards ahead. Emergency supplies, communication equipment, and most importantly, a fire suppression system with hundreds of gallons of water under pressure. Spearfinger caught me just as I reached the station door. Her claws punched through the metal like it was cardboard, missing my head by inches. I rolled under her arm and into the building. The emergency controls were right where they should be. Fire suppression system. Manual activation. I hit the button and prayed the old equipment still worked. Water exploded from pipes all around the building, flooding the floor and streaming out the windows. Spearfinger shrieked as the spray hit her, steam rising from her stone skin. "Flowing water!" she screamed. "It burns!" She tried to retreat, but her claws were stuck in the metal door. The constant spray from the fire suppression system had her trapped. Every drop that hit her sizzled and sparked like water on hot coals. I pressed my advantage, moving closer with the glowing flint knife. "Tell me how to save Stephen. He dies." Spearfinger thrashed against the door, trying to pull her claws free. "They all die. I have hunted these mountains for 1,000 years. Not anymore." I drove the flint blade deep into her chest, right where a human heart would be. Blue light exploded from the wound, and Spearfinger's scream shattered every window in the weather station. She tore her claws free from the door and stumbled backward, the flint knife still buried in her chest. Dark ichor poured from the wound, steaming where it hit the flowing water. "This is not over, little ranger," she gasped. "I am stone. I endure." Spearfinger turned and ran into the night, her stone feet leaving cracked prints in the granite. I heard her crashing through the forest, heading for the highest peaks where the water couldn't follow. I ran back to the clearing as fast as I could. Stephen was barely alive, but alive. I cut him down and radioed for medical evacuation. The helicopter found us just as the sun came up over Mount Mitchell. Stephen survived, though he never remembered what happened to him. The doctors said trauma could cause memory loss, and I didn't correct them. Some things were better forgotten. The official report blamed everything on bear attacks. Unusual claw patterns, they said, but definitely a bear. Case closed. I requested a transfer 3 weeks later. Desert posting in Arizona, far from stone mountains and ancient hungers. My supervisor approved it without question. "Too many animal attacks on my watch," they said. "Better to start fresh somewhere else." The Cherokee Tribal Council came to Mount Mitchell before I left. They performed a purification ceremony at the summit, burning sage and singing old songs that echoed off the granite peaks. The tribal elder, a woman named Mary Sixkiller, sought me out afterward. "Your grandmother was Emma Stormwind," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am." Emma told us stories about this mountain, about things that hunted here long before the white settlers came. She said one day someone would have to face the old hunger. Mary pressed something into my hand, a small pouch of Cherokee sage and blessed salt. "For the dreams," she said. "They'll come for a while. The mountain remembers, and so will you." She was right about the dreams. Even now, 5 years later, I sometimes wake up hearing Spearfinger's voice calling from dark places. Not Mount Mitchell. She hasn't returned there. But stone calls to stone, and there are old mountains everywhere. Mount Mitchell is safer now. The Park Service installed new lighting and emergency phones on all the major trails. Night hiking requires permits and check-ins every hour. They say it's because of the bear attacks, but I know better. Hikers still report hearing voices sometimes, especially during full moon nights. A woman calling for help from the deep woods, desperate and afraid. But the voices are different now. Older, weaker, echoes of Spearfinger's hunger bouncing off the granite peaks, too faint to lure anyone up the dark trails. The clearing where it all happened is marked as a geological survey area now, off limits to tourists. The spiral of stones has been broken up and scattered. The trees with the claw marks were cut down and burned. But you can't kill a place's memory. The mountain knows what hunted there, what fed there, what might someday return. I keep the flint knife with me, even here in the desert. Cherokee blessing or not, it's the only thing I've ever seen that could make something like Spearfinger bleed. My grandmother's gift, passed down through generations of women who knew that some hungers are older than civilization. Sometimes, late at night when the wind howls through the saguaro cactus, I wonder if Spearfinger really died that night. Stone endures, like she said. Stone remembers, and somewhere in the deep mountains, in caves and crevices where water never flows, something might be waiting for the old hunger to heal. The desert is safer. No granite peaks, no ancient forests, no places where stone creatures can hide and hunt. But even here, I keep the emergency beacon close and never go out alone after dark. Because I learned something important on Mount Mitchell. The old stories aren't just stories. They're warnings, passed down by people who knew what lived in the wild places. And some warnings should never be forgotten. The mountains remember everything, and everything remembers the mountains. My name is Samuel Colebrook, and I've been a park ranger in Kentucky's Daniel Boone National Forest for 16 years. Before that, I spent 8 years digging coal out of the ground until a cave-in nearly killed me and took my best friend instead. That's when I decided I'd rather work above ground, helping people, instead of just helping coal companies get richer. I know these woods like my own backyard. Every cave, every cliff, every hidden valley between the sandstone walls of Red River Gorge. In my time here, I've pulled 23 people out of cave-ins and gotten lost hikers home safe to their families. I've seen black bears, wild boars, and once even a mountain lion that wasn't supposed to be in Kentucky. But I'd never seen anything that made me question what's real and what isn't. That changed in September of 1976, during one of those Indian summer weeks when the heat hangs on even though the leaves are starting to turn. It started with a report from 2 backpackers who came stumbling out of Church Hollow looking white as sheets. They were college kids from Louisville, probably never spent a night outdoors before this trip. The boy kept checking over his shoulder like something was following them, and the girl wouldn't stop shaking. There were children playing in the old settlement, the girl said. Her name was Susan, and she had dirt under her fingernails like she'd been clawing at something. But they looked wrong, too pale. And their clothes, they were wearing old-fashioned clothes like from my grandmother's time. Church Hollow sits in a narrow valley about 3 miles off the main trail. You can't drive there, just hike in on a path that winds between limestone cliffs. There used to be a small settlement there, back in the 1922, maybe 30 families trying to scratch out a living farming tobacco and raising hogs. Then tuberculosis hit the children hard one winter, and by spring, most of the families had packed up and left. The ones who stayed were gone by 1925. I'd been through Church Hollow dozens of times over the years. Just empty buildings, slowly falling apart, and a small cemetery with dates that made you sad to read them. Lots of small headstones from that winter when the sickness came through. Kids probably just saw some teenagers fooling around. I told them, but something about the way they looked at each other made me think there was more to it. That afternoon, I hiked out to Church Hollow myself, thinking I'd just take a look around and file a report. Maybe post some signs about trespassing if there really were kids playing pranks on hikers. The walk-in felt different somehow. Usually the forest sounds normal. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, insects buzzing. But that day, everything seemed too quiet. Even my footsteps sounded too loud on the trail. When I got to the hollow, I could see why those backpackers had been spooked. The old settlement sat in the valley like something from a different time. 6 or 7 buildings still standing, including a one-room schoolhouse with its bell tower. The afternoon sun slanted down between the cliffs, making long shadows that seemed to move when you weren't looking directly at them. I walked through the settlement slowly, checking each building. Most were empty, except for old furniture too heavy for anyone to carry out. But when I got to the schoolhouse, I stopped cold. There were footprints in the dust on the floor, small ones, like children would make. And they were fresh, no more than a few hours old by the look of them. The prints went from the door to the old teacher's desk, then over to where a rusty playground set sat outside one of the windows. I went outside to look at the swings. 3 of them hung from an old metal frame, chains red with rust. But one of them was still moving slightly, like someone had just gotten off it. The air felt colder near the playground, maybe 10 or 15 degrees cooler than it should have been. My breath started to fog up, which made no sense in September heat. And my flashlight, which had been working fine all day, started to flicker when I pointed it at the swings. That's when I noticed the toys. Someone had left small toys on the children's graves in the cemetery. New toys, a red ball, some marbles, a wooden top that still had its paint. They sat on graves marked with dates from 1922 and 1923. Stones so old the names were hard to read. I picked up the ball. It was still warm, like someone had been holding it. As I stood there in that quiet cemetery, looking at fresh toys on 50-year-old graves, I felt something I hadn't felt since that mine cave-in 16 years ago. The feeling that I was in a place where the normal rules didn't work anymore. I should have filed my report and requested backup right then. But 16 years of dealing with pranks and false alarms made me think I could handle whatever was going on in Church Hollow by myself. 2 days later, I got a call that changed everything. "Sam, we've got a problem." It was Betty Mountainheart, another ranger who worked the eastern section. Her voice sounded tight over the radio. "Scout troops overdue from Church Hollow. Should have checked in yesterday morning." The troop was from Lexington. 6 kids between 10 and 12 years old, plus 2 adult leaders. They'd planned a 2-day camping trip to learn wilderness survival skills. Simple stuff that should have been safe as sitting in church. "When did you last hear from them?" I asked. Paul Henderson radioed in Tuesday evening. Said they were setting up camp near the old settlement. Everything was fine. Kids were excited about exploring the buildings. That was the last contact. Paul Henderson was an Eagle Scout himself, 28 years old and experienced with kids. His assistant was Janet Mills, a former teacher who knew first aid. If something had gone wrong, they should have been able to handle it. Unless something went wrong that couldn't be handled. I drove out to the trailhead where their vehicles were still parked. 2 cars, both unlocked, keys still in the ignition like they'd expected to be back by now. That was the first sign of real trouble. Paul was too careful to leave cars unlocked overnight. The hike into Church Hollow felt different this time. The silence was deeper, and the shadows seemed to reach farther than they should. My radio crackled with static every few minutes, even though it had been working fine that morning. I found their campsite about 100 yards from the old settlement. 2 tents, still set up but empty. Sleeping bags laid out like the kids had been planning to come back that night. A cold fire pit with the remains of hot dogs and marshmallows. But no people. And no signs of a struggle. I called out their names, listening to my voice echo off the cliff walls. Nothing called back except my own words bouncing around the hollow. That's when I started checking the buildings more carefully. In the old general store, I found Paul Henderson. He was sitting in a corner with his back against the wall, eyes wide open, staring at nothing. But something was wrong with his face. Deep lines around his eyes and mouth that hadn't been there before. His hair, which had been brown when I met him at a safety meeting last month, was now streaked with gray. When I checked his pulse, his skin felt cold and papery, like an old man's skin. Paul Henderson was 28 years old when he brought that scout troop to Church Hollow. The body I found looked 60. I tried the radio, but got nothing but static. Tried my cell phone, no signal, which wasn't unusual in the hollow. I was on my own with a dead man who'd somehow aged 30 years overnight. As I knelt next to Paul's body, trying to figure out what could have killed him, I heard something that made my blood go cold. Children laughing. It came from somewhere outside, high and clear like kids playing a game, but there was something wrong with the sound. It echoed too much, lasted too long, seemed to come from all directions at once. I went to the window and looked out at the settlement. They were there. 8 children playing in the dusty space between the buildings. They wore old-fashioned clothes, overalls and dresses that looked like something from the 1922. Their skin was pale, almost white, and their hair looked thin and colorless. They were playing some kind of tag game, running between the buildings and calling to each other. But their voices sounded far away, even though I could see them clearly. One of the children, a girl in a faded blue dress, looked up at the window where I was standing. She smiled and waved like she was greeting an old friend. That's when the temperature in the room dropped 20 degrees in about 2 seconds. My breath turned to fog, and frost started forming on the inside of the windows. The girl pointed at me and said something to the other children. They all turned to look at the building where I was hiding. Then they started walking toward me. I backed away from the window, but there was nowhere to go. The old general store had only one door, and those children were between me and it. But when I looked out the window again, they were gone. The hollow was empty, except for the shadows and the silence. The temperature went back to normal. The frost melted off the windows, and my breath stopped fogging up. I stood there for about 10 minutes, heart pounding, waiting for something else to happen. When nothing did, I forced myself to go outside and search the other buildings. I found State Police Detective Lou Garrison in the old church. He was sprawled across one of the broken pews like he'd fallen asleep during a sermon. But his face told the same story as Paul Henderson's. Deep lines, gray hair, skin like old leather. Lou Garrison had been 42 years old when Betty called him in to help with the search. The body in the church looked 80. Pinned to his shirt was a note written in a child's handwriting. He wanted to play with us forever. Now he can. I should have run. Every instinct I developed in 16 years of ranger work was screaming at me to get out of Church Hollow and call for backup. But 6 children were still missing, and I couldn't abandon them. I also couldn't ignore what I'd seen. Those pale children in old-fashioned clothes weren't teenagers playing pranks. They were something else entirely. I set up a defensive position in the schoolhouse, the only building with a clear view in all directions. As the sun started to set behind the cliffs, I tried the radio again. This time, I got through to Betty. "Sam, thank God. We've been trying to reach you for hours. Lou Garrison went in after you, and now we can't raise him either." "Lou's dead, Betty. So is Paul Henderson. Something killed them both." "What do you mean, killed them? How?" I looked out the schoolhouse window at the empty hollow. "How do you explain that something had aged 2 grown men to death? Just stay out of Church Hollow until I figure this out. And call for backup from the state police. Sam, you need to get out of there. Now. Not without those kids." I ended the transmission before she could argue. As darkness fell over the hollow, I heard them coming. First it was just whispers, too quiet to make out words. Then footsteps on the wooden porches of the old buildings. Then that children's laughter again, echoing off the cliff walls like it was coming from inside a cave. I turned on my flashlight and pointed it out the window. The beam twisted and bent like it was going through water instead of air. When I tried to focus it on the old church, the light scattered in all directions. That's when I saw them clearly for the first time. 8 children, just like before. But now I could see their faces in detail, and what I saw made me understand why Paul Henderson and Lou Garrison had died with such terror in their eyes. The children's skin wasn't just pale, it was translucent, like you could see right through it to something underneath. Their eyes were too large and too dark, and when they smiled, their teeth looked too sharp. They weren't ghosts exactly. They cast shadows and left footprints in the dust. But they weren't alive either, not in any way that made sense. The girl in the blue dress stood in front of the group. She looked about 8 years old, with blonde hair that seemed to float around her head like she was underwater. "Mister," she called, in a voice that sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "We know you're in there. Come out and play with us." "Where are the children from the scout troop?" I called back. "They're playing with us. They're our friends now. They'll never have to leave." That's when I heard crying from somewhere behind the schoolhouse. Quiet sobbing that sounded like kids who were scared and trying not to make noise. I grabbed my flashlight and headed for the back door. As soon as I opened it, the temperature dropped again. My breath fogged up so thick I could barely see. But I could hear them clearly now, 6 young voices whispering to each other somewhere in the darkness beyond the building. "Help us," one of them said. "Please help us." I followed the sound around to the old root cellar behind the schoolhouse. The wooden door was standing open, and the voices were coming from inside. When I shined my flashlight down the stone steps, I saw them. The 6 scout troop members were huddled together at the bottom of the cellar. But like Paul Henderson and Lou Garrison, something terrible had happened to them. These children, who should have been 10 and 12 years old, now looked like teenagers. Their faces were gaunt and aged, their hair streaked with premature gray. They moved slowly, like old people with arthritis. "What happened to you?" I whispered. "They made us play their games," said a boy I recognized as Tommy Williams. His voice cracked like he was going through puberty, but he should have been in 5th grade. "Every time they touch you, you get older. We can't stop playing, or they'll make us old like the grown-ups. Where's Miss Mills?" "They took her to the old house. She tried to fight them, tried to protect us." "That was this morning. She looked really old when they carried her away." I heard footsteps above us. Light footsteps, like children running across the wooden floor of the schoolhouse. "They know you're here," whispered a girl named Sarah Chen. "They can smell living people. They've been waiting for more friends to come." "Why do they want friends?" "They're lonely," Tommy said. "They died here when they were little, and they've been waiting for other children to play with. But when they play their games, everyone gets old and dies too." The footsteps above us stopped right over our heads. "Sam," came the girl's voice from the schoolhouse, "we know you found them. Bring them up to play. We promise we'll be gentle this time." I looked at the aged faces of those 6 kids and knew I was looking at the future they had planned for me. These children had been playing with death for 50 years, and they were very good at their game. But I also knew something else. I'd heard the loneliness in that pale girl's voice. These weren't evil spirits trying to hurt people. They were children who had died scared and alone, and they didn't understand that their games killed the living friends they were trying to make. That gave me an idea. A dangerous idea that might get us all killed, but it was the only chance I could see. I turned to the scout troop. How long can you stay down here before they come get you? Not long, Sarah said. When they get impatient, they just reach through the walls and drag you out. Can you give me 10 minutes? Maybe. But what are you going to do? Something I should have thought of before anyone died. I climbed the steps and walked back into the schoolhouse, where 8 dead children were waiting to play their final game with me. The pale children stood in the schoolhouse like they'd been waiting for me their whole lives. Which, in a way, they had. You came back, said the girl in blue. Up close, I could see that her dress had small flowers embroidered on it, and her shoes were the kind with buttons that little girls wore in the 1920 seconds. We thought you might run away, like the others tried to. Others? The people who come here sometimes. Hikers and campers, they always run when we try to play with them, but you stayed. That means you want to be our friend. Looking at their faces, I could see they really believed that. These children had been alone so long that they couldn't understand why anyone would want to leave them. What happened to you? I asked. How did you die? A boy in overalls stepped forward. He had freckles and red hair, and he couldn't have been more than 7 when he died. The coughing sickness came in winter, he said. It made us hot, then cold, then we couldn't breathe right. Mama said we had to stay home from school until we got better. But we never got better, said another girl. We got sicker and sicker, and then one day we woke up and everyone else was gone. Our families left us here all alone. That's not what happened, I said gently. Your families didn't leave you. You died from tuberculosis, and they buried you in the cemetery outside. They loved you, but they couldn't save you. The children looked at each other with confusion on their pale faces. We're not dead, the girl in blue said. We're just waiting for someone to finish teaching us our lessons so we can go home. That's when I understood what was really keeping them here. You were all in school when you got sick, weren't you? They nodded. And you never got to finish the school year because you died during the winter. Miss Catherine said we'd make up the lessons when we felt better, the red-haired boy said, but she never came back to teach us. I walked over to the old teacher's desk. It was covered in dust, but underneath I could see books and papers that had been left there for 50 years. Arithmetic books, spelling primers, a grade book with entries that stopped in December 1922. What if I finished teaching you those lessons? I said. What if I helped you complete your schoolwork so you could go home? The children's faces lit up with hope, but there was fear there too. The last teacher who tried to help us got old and died, the girl said. Everyone who stays here too long gets old. We can't help it. It just happens when we get excited about having friends. But you can control it, can't you? If you try really hard? Maybe, for a little while. But it's hard to remember not to take people's life when we're having fun. I sat down at the teacher's desk and opened one of the arithmetic books. It was turned to a page about multiplication tables, the kind of basic math that 3rd and 4th graders would be learning. If you can control it long enough for me to teach you these lessons, I promise I'll help you finish school so you can go home. The 8 children gathered around the desk like students sitting for class. For the first time since I'd seen them, they looked like normal kids, eager to learn, wanting to please their teacher. But if you start taking my life while I'm teaching, I'll have to stop, and then you'll never get to go home. We'll try really hard, the girl in blue promised. We want to go home so much. I started with simple multiplication. 2 times 2 equals 4. 3 times 3 equals 9. The children repeated the answers in small voices that echoed in the old schoolhouse. At first, everything seemed normal. The children were polite and attentive, raising their hands when they had questions. The temperature stayed normal, and my flashlight worked fine. But as the lesson continued, I could feel something pulling at me, a tired feeling that started in my bones and spread outward. When I looked in the broken mirror on the wall, I could see new lines forming around my eyes. They were trying to control their power, but it was like asking kids not to breathe. It was just what they did now. Focus on the lesson, I told them, and myself. What's 4 times 5? 20, they said together. We worked through the multiplication tables, then moved on to division. The pulling feeling got stronger, and I could feel myself aging with each question I asked. But the children were learning, and more importantly, they were remembering what it felt like to be students instead of lonely spirits. When we finished the arithmetic book, I opened the spelling primer. Can you spell friendship? I asked. The girl in blue stood up and went to the old blackboard. She picked up a piece of chalk that should have crumbled to dust decades ago and carefully wrote out the letters, Friendship. Very good. Now, can you tell me what friendship means? The children thought about this for a long moment. It means caring about someone and not wanting to hurt them, said the red-haired boy. It means playing together but making sure everyone has fun, added another girl. It means letting people go home when they need to, said the girl in blue, and I could hear sadness in her voice. That's when I knew we'd reached the real lesson. You've been hurting the people who came here because you were lonely and didn't understand that your games were dangerous. But real friendship means putting your friends' needs first, even if it makes you sad. The children nodded, and I could see tears in their two dark eyes. We don't want to hurt anyone, the girl said. We just don't want to be alone anymore. But you won't be alone. When you finish your lessons and go home, you'll be with your families again. The families who missed you and loved you, even after you died. I opened the last book on the desk, a reader full of simple stories and poems. We read together about children playing in gardens, families having picnics, students learning their lessons and going home proud of their work. As we read, something changed in the schoolhouse. The air got warmer and lighter. The children's faces became less pale, more like normal kids. And the pulling feeling that was aging me started to fade. When we finished the last story, the children stood up from their seats. Did we do good in school today, teacher? The girl in blue asked. You did wonderful. You learned your lessons, and you learned about friendship. Now you can go home. One by one, the children started to fade like morning mist. But before they disappeared completely, each one came up to say goodbye. Thank you for teaching us, they said. Thank you for helping us remember how to be kind. The girl in blue was the last to leave. Will you tell people we were sorry? About the people who got old? We didn't mean to hurt them. I'll tell them, I promised. She smiled, a normal happy child's smile, and faded away like the others. The schoolhouse was empty now except for me and the sound of wind through the broken windows. But it felt peaceful for the first time in 50 years. I found Janet Mills in the old house behind the settlement. She was alive but unconscious, and she'd aged 20 years in 2 days. The scout troop kids were weak but recovering. They'd stopped aging as soon as the ghost children moved on. When backup finally arrived, I told them a story about carbon monoxide poisoning from old mine shafts under the settlement. It was a lie that made more sense than the truth, and it kept Church Hollow closed to the public permanently. Paul Henderson and Lou Garrison were listed as victims of accidental gas exposure. Their families got death benefits and closure, which was more than they'd have gotten if I'd told the truth about aged corpses and ghost children. The scout troop kids recovered completely, though they don't remember much about their time in Church Hollow. Their parents think they were just confused from the gas poisoning. Sometimes that's the kindest thing, to let people forget what they can't understand. Janet Mills kept some of the aging. She was 32 when she went into Church Hollow, and she looked 45 when she came out. But she was alive, and she never asked questions about what really happened there. I submitted my report and requested early retirement. My supervisor approved it without argument. I guess I looked like I'd earned it, because I had aged too during that long night of teaching school to dead children. Not as much as the others, but enough. I'm 57 now, though I should only be 42. My hair is completely gray, and my hands shake sometimes when I think about that night. But I sleep well, knowing that 8 lonely children finally went home to their families. A year after everything happened, I went back to Church Hollow one last time. The settlement buildings had all collapsed during the winter, old wood finally giving up after carrying the weight of sorrow for so long. The cemetery was still there, but someone had planted wildflowers on the children's graves. I never found out who planted those flowers. But they bloom every spring, and hikers sometimes report seeing them move in the wind, like small hands waving goodbye. Church Hollow stays closed to the public. The official reason is unstable mine shafts and dangerous gas pockets. But sometimes, on quiet September evenings, I think about a one-room schoolhouse where 8 children learned their final lesson about letting go. And I hope that wherever they are now, they're not lonely anymore. The Forest Service offered me a desk job in Frankfurt when I retired from field work. I turned it down. Some experiences change you too much to go back to normal life. Instead, I moved to a small cabin outside the forest boundaries, where I can keep an eye on places like Church Hollow and make sure some stories stay buried where they belong. But I also know that there are other places in these hills where the past hasn't finished with the present yet. Other hollows where old sorrows wait for someone to understand them. And sometimes, when the call comes in about missing hikers or strange reports from campers, I pack my gear and head back into the woods. Because some jobs never really end, even after you've turned in your badge. Some responsibilities follow you home and live in your bones until the day you die. And somewhere in these hills, there are still lessons waiting to be taught. My name is Franklin Whitehawk, and I've been a forest ranger for 8 years now. Most folks just call me Frank. I work the remote parts of the Cherokee National Forest in Tennessee, where the mountains get steep and the hollows run deep. It's wild country up there, the kind of place where you can walk for days and never see another soul. I specialize in law enforcement, which mostly means hunting down illegal stills. Moonshiners love these mountains because they're hard to reach and easy to hide in. In my 8 years, I've shut down 47 operations. I know how they think, where they set up, and how they run when the law comes calling. The call came in on a rainy Tuesday morning in April 1955. My supervisor, Jim Crawford, handed me a folder with a federal tip inside. "Frank, we got word about a big operation up in Moonshine Hollow," he said, tapping the papers. "Real big. Maybe 12 stills or more." I whistled low. Most operations I'd seen had 2 or 3 stills at most. 12 was industrial scale. "Where'd the tip come from?" I asked. "Federal boys. They've been tracking this ring for months. Word is they're making thousands of gallons up there." He showed me the map. Moonshine Hollow was way up in the Unaka Mountains, near the North Carolina border. It was rough country, accessible only by following Bear Creek up through a narrow gap between 2 steep ridges. No roads, no trails, just creek bed and thick forest. "I'll need backup," I said, studying the terrain. "Already arranged. Federal agent named Ray Stockton is heading up there today to scout. You'll meet him tomorrow morning at the creek mouth." I spent the rest of that day checking my gear. Radio, first aid kit, handcuffs, sidearm. I'd learned to pack light, but smart. These mountain operations could turn dangerous fast, especially when you caught them running. My grandmother used to tell stories about these hollows. She was half Cherokee, and the old folks had names for every ridge and stream. They called this area Kekle Kudle in the old language. When I was little, she'd say it meant, "where the beast men walk." Just old stories, meant to keep kids from wandering too far into the deep woods. I never put much stock in Cherokee ghost stories. My job was dealing with real criminals, making real moonshine. Still, as I loaded my pack that evening, I found myself thinking about those old tales. The rain kept falling all night, drumming on my cabin roof. Weather reports said it might flood in the low areas. Spring floods were common in these mountains when the winter snow melted fast. I made a mental note to watch the creek levels. That night, I dreamed about my grandmother's stories. In the dream, I was walking through a dark hollow where the trees grew too close together, and something with yellow eyes watched me from the shadows. When I woke up, I could still smell moonshine and something else, something wild and wrong. But morning came with coffee and sunshine, and dreams fade fast in daylight. I had a job to do. The hike to Moonshine Hollow took 3 hours, following Bear Creek up through country that got wilder with every mile. The creek ran high and fast from all the rain, brown water rushing over rocks and fallen logs. Spring was just starting to show, a few early wildflowers and fresh green on the trees. I found the spot where I was supposed to meet Ray Stockton, but he wasn't there. Just a small clearing where the creek made a sharp bend. I checked my watch, 9 in the morning, right on time. I waited an hour, then started up the creek alone. Maybe he'd gone ahead to scout. Federal agents sometimes worked that way, impatient to get results. The first sign something was wrong came after another mile of walking. The trees along the creek started showing strange marks. Deep gouges in the bark, like something with long claws had raked them, too high up to be a bear, and the wrong shape anyway. These marks went straight up and down, like whatever made them had been walking upright. I stopped to examine one set of gouges on a big oak tree. The marks were fresh, still showing white wood underneath. Whatever made them had serious strength. The cuts went deep, almost to the heartwood. That's when I smelled it. Moonshine, sure enough, but mixed with something else. Something that made my nose wrinkle and my stomach turn, like wet dog and rotten meat all mixed together. Following the smell, I found the first still. It was smashed to pieces. The copper pot lay crumpled like a tin can, the coil twisted into knots. Jars of finished product were scattered everywhere, most of them broken. The smell of spilled alcohol was strong, but that other smell was stronger. This wasn't federal destruction. We always took stills apart carefully, preserving evidence for court. This looked like something had attacked the equipment in a rage. I found footprints in the mud around the still. They started normal, work boots, size 11 or 12. But as they moved away from the still, they changed. Got longer, wider, and then I saw what made my blood run cold. The boot prints ended, and something else began. Prints that looked almost human, but wrong. Too long in the toes, with deep gouges where claws had dug into the earth. Whatever made these tracks had 5 toes like a man, but each toe ended in something sharp. I followed the strange tracks for 50 yards before they disappeared into the rocky creek bed. My hands were shaking as I got out my radio to call for backup. Static, nothing but static. I tried different frequencies, checked the batteries, extended the antenna, still nothing. Radio sometimes had trouble in these deep hollows, but mine had worked fine on the way up. That's when I heard the sound. It started low, like a growl, but it rose into something that was almost human, almost like someone moaning in pain. It echoed off the hollow walls, making it impossible to tell where it came from. The sound raised every hair on my body. I'd heard bears, wildcats, even panthers in these mountains. This was none of those. This was something that didn't belong in any woods I knew. I drew my sidearm and kept walking upstream. The second still was in worse shape than the first. Not just smashed, twisted into shapes that didn't make sense. The copper tubing was tied in knots like rope. Heavy iron pieces that should have taken 2 men to move were scattered like toys. And then I found Ray Stockton. He was lying face down in the creek, his federal jacket torn to shreds. I waded in and turned him over, hoping maybe he was just unconscious. But one look at his face told me different. Something with claws and teeth had gotten to him. His throat was torn open, and there were deep gashes across his chest. But what made my stomach turn was the way his arms were positioned, crossed over his chest like he'd been laid out for burial. Whatever killed him had enough intelligence to arrange the body. I was still standing in the creek, staring at Ray's torn face, when I heard footsteps coming down the hollow behind me. Frank Whitehawk. I spun around to see Sheriff Homer Ridgeback and his deputy, Willis Thornton, making their way down the creek toward me. I'd never been happier to see backup in my life. Sheriff, we got a real problem here, I called out, gesturing to Ray's body. Homer was a big man, thick through the chest and shoulders, with gray hair and a permanent scowl. He'd been sheriff of this county for 15 years and thought he'd seen everything. Willis was younger, maybe 25, quiet and thoughtful. Word was his family had been in these mountains for generations. Homer took one look at Ray's body and whistled low. What the hell did this? I don't know, I said, but it's not natural. Look at these tracks. I showed them the strange footprints in the mud. Willis crouched down to study them, his face growing pale. My grandfather used to tell stories, he said quietly. Cherokee stories about Kekle Kudle. Beast men who walked upright but weren't human anymore. Those are just stories, Homer said, but his voice had lost its confidence. We found the third still a quarter-mile upstream. This one was different. Instead of being destroyed, it looked like it had been used recently. Fresh mash in the fermenter, warm ashes in the firebox. But the operators were nowhere to be seen. Somebody was here this morning, I said, touching the still warm copper. That's when we found the blood. It started as a few drops near the still, then became a trail leading deeper into the hollow. Not spattered like you'd see from a fight, but dripped steady like someone badly hurt was walking away. Homer drew his weapon. Stay together. Whatever's out here, we don't want to meet it alone. The blood trail led us up a steep slope to a natural clearing surrounded by limestone cliffs. In the center of the clearing was the main operation, 12 large stills arranged in a rough circle, with sleeping tents and supply shacks scattered around the edges. But the place was dead quiet. No smoke from the fires, no sounds of work. Just that same terrible smell I'd noticed before. Stronger now. We found the first body near the largest still. Copper Pete Wilson, a moonshiner I'd tangled with before. He was lying on his back with his arms spread wide, same as Ray had been positioned. Something had torn his chest open, but there was hardly any blood on the ground. "Where's all the blood?" Willis asked. Before I could answer, we heard it. That same moaning growl I'd heard earlier, but closer now. It was coming from the tree line on the far side of the clearing. "There," Homer whispered, pointing with his gun. Something was moving in the shadows between the trees. Something big, walking upright but not quite right. It moved with a rolling, unsteady gait, like it was hurt or drunk. "Federal agents, come out with your hands up," Homer shouted. The thing in the trees stopped moving. For a long moment, everything was quiet except for the sound of water dripping from the stills. Then it stepped into the clearing. I'd seen a lot of strange things in 8 years of mountain law enforcement, but nothing had prepared me for this. It stood almost 8 feet tall, covered in coarse brown hair, but walking on 2 legs like a man. Its face was a nightmare mix of human and animal, intelligent eyes above a muzzle full of sharp teeth. But the worst part was that it was wearing torn remnants of human clothes. Work pants, hanging in shreds. A flannel shirt, stretched and ripped but still recognizable. "Jesus Christ," Homer breathed. The creature's head turned toward us, and I saw something that chilled me more than its size or teeth. There was human intelligence in those eyes. Not animal cunning, but real human thought. It recognized us, understood what we were. When it spoke, its voice was thick and slurred, but the words were clear. "Get out of my hollow." That's when Homer made his mistake. Instead of backing away, he raised his gun and fired. The bullet hit the creature center mass, but it barely staggered. Instead, it let out a roar that echoed off the cliff walls and charged straight at us. Homer got off 2 more shots before it reached him. I saw the bullets hit, saw little puffs of hair and skin, but they didn't slow it down. The creature hit Homer like a freight train. Its clawed hands wrapped around his chest and lifted him off the ground. I heard ribs crack like dry wood. Willis and I both opened fire, emptying our guns into the thing's back. It dropped Homer and turned toward us, blood running from multiple wounds but moving like they didn't hurt at all. "Run," Willis shouted. We ran. Behind us, I heard Homer screaming. Then the screaming stopped. Willis and I made it to the main still house, a large wooden building where they stored the finished product. We slammed the door and barricaded it with everything we could find. Outside, we could hear the creature moving around, occasionally bumping against the walls. "What the hell is that thing?" I gasped, trying to catch my breath. Willis was checking the windows, making sure they were secure. My grandfather was full Cherokee. He told me stories about Kekla Kudle. What happens when someone breaks the old taboos? What kind of taboos? Making poison on sacred ground, taking more than you need, disrespecting the spirits of the forest. Another bump against the wall, harder this time. Whatever was out there was testing our defenses. "You really believe those stories?" I asked. Willis looked at me with haunted eyes. "After what we just saw?" "Frank," my grandfather said, "when someone makes alcohol on cursed ground, drinking it can change them, turn them into something between human and beast." Through a crack in the wall, I could see the creature moving through the clearing. In the daylight, it looked even more wrong. Too tall, too muscular, covered in that coarse brown hair, but still wearing bits of human clothing. "How do we stop it?" Grandfather said, "They're drawn to alcohol, but also weakened by it. The more they drink, the more they change, but also the more confused they become. And running water, streams and rivers, they can't cross running water while they're transformed." As if it heard us talking, the creature suddenly appeared at the main window. Its face filled the opening, yellow eyes staring directly at me. When it spoke, I recognized something familiar in its slurred voice. "I know you, Ranger, man, you shut down my stills before." It was Big Jim Crawford, the head of this operation. I'd arrested him twice in the past 3 years, but he'd always managed to get light sentences. Now I understood why he'd chosen this hollow for his biggest operation yet. "Jim Crawford, is that you?" The creature's face twisted into what might have been a smile. "Was Jim, now something else. You want to know what happened?" Despite my fear, I found myself leaning closer to the window. "Tell me." "Found this place last winter. Good water. Hidden location. But something felt Wrong about it. Cherokee ground, maybe. Grandfather Willis. His people. They stayed away. The creature, Jim, was breathing hard, like talking was difficult. Thought, stories were nonsense. Set up anyway. Made, best shine. Ever. Clear as spring water. Strong as lightning. What went wrong? First batch, tested it myself, just one sip. But something was different. Tasted like power. Like wild things. Couldn't stop drinking. Through the window, I could see Jim's human eyes struggling with the beast that had taken over his body. Each drink made me stronger, bigger, but also hungrier. For more shine. For blood. For hunt. Behind us, Willis was moving around the still house, gathering supplies. I heard the sound of liquid splashing and smelled the sharp scent of moonshine. How many others? I asked Jim. 6 men, working with me. All drank. The cursed shine, all changed, but I was, first, strongest. Killed them when they tried to leave. Now I'm alone, but not lonely. You and boy will keep me company. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood run cold. Water. Rushing water, getting louder by the minute. Willis appeared beside me, his face grim. Flash flood. All that rain yesterday is coming down the mountain, creeks rising fast. Through the window, I could see water beginning to pool around the stills. Jim's transformed face showed something like fear. Can't cross running water, he growled. But you can't stay in there forever. The water was rising quickly now, already ankle-deep around the building. Willis had gathered several jugs of moonshine and was soaking rags in the clear liquid. Frank, we need to get out of here before the flood gets too high. But we also need to deal with Jim. How? Willis held up a moonshine-soaked rag. Grandfather said fire was the only thing that could drive them back to human form. If we can get Jim to drink enough alcohol while he's surrounded by running water, the transformation might reverse itself. I finished. Outside, the water was knee-deep and rising. Jim was backing toward higher ground, but his movements were becoming more frantic as the flood surrounded him on all sides. Now or never, Willis said. We kicked open the door and waded into the rising water, Willis carrying a jug of moonshine in each hand. Jim saw us coming and roared his rage, but he couldn't approach through the rushing water. Jim, I shouted, you want alcohol? Here's all you can drink. I grabbed one of the jugs from Willis and threw it at Jim's feet. It shattered on a rock, spilling high-proof moonshine into the floodwater. The smell of alcohol filled the air. Jim's beast eyes fixed on the spilled liquor with desperate hunger. Despite the running water around his feet, he bent down and tried to lap up the alcohol-tainted flood. More, he growled. Need more. Willis threw the second jug, and I grabbed 2 more from the still house. Each one we broke at Jim's feet, creating a pool of alcohol-tainted water that he couldn't resist drinking. As he drank, Jim's transformation began to reverse. The coarse hair started to fall away, his massive frame began to shrink, his clawed hands became more human. But the flood was rising too. Water that had been at our knees was now at our waists. In another few minutes, the whole clearing would be underwater. Jim, I shouted, get to high ground, you're changing back. But Jim couldn't stop drinking. Even as his human mind returned, the alcohol addiction was too strong. He kept lapping at the contaminated flood water, and with each swallow, he became more human but also more helpless. The last thing I saw was Jim Crawford, fully human again, trying to swim against the rushing flood with a belly full of high-proof moonshine. The current took him under, just as Willis and I reached the safety of the ridge. The floodwaters receded by evening, leaving behind a hollow, scoured clean of evidence. The stills were scattered and buried under tons of mud and debris. Jim Crawford's body was found 3 miles downstream, looking for all the world like a moonshiner who drowned trying to escape a federal raid. My official report was simple. Illegal moonshine operation destroyed by flash flood. Suspects drowned attempting to flee. Federal agent Ray Stockton killed in equipment accident during initial investigation. The federal investigation was quietly closed. No one wanted to dig too deep into what had happened in Moonshine Hollow. Willis Thornton turned in his deputy badge the next week. He said he was going to spend time with his grandfather, learning the old Cherokee ways of keeping the mountain spirits peaceful. He gave me a small leather pouch filled with herbs and tobacco. For protection, he said. Case you run into any more cursed ground. Sheriff Ridgeback got a hero's funeral. The official story was that he died helping federal agents break up the moonshine ring. His widow never knew what really killed him. As for me, I put in for a transfer to the western forests. Got assigned to Montana, where the mountains are high and clean, and there aren't any old Cherokee stories about beastmen in the hollows. But Montana didn't help. I started drinking to forget what I'd seen in Moonshine Hollow. Bourbon, mostly. Though I could never touch moonshine again. The drinking got worse over the years, cost me my job eventually. Funny thing about alcohol, it changes you, makes you into something you weren't before. Maybe not into a beast with claws and teeth, but into something just as dangerous to the people you love. I heard from Willis one more time. About 5 years later, he'd become some kind of Cherokee medicine man, helping his people maintain the old traditions. He told me the Cherokee families were performing cleansing ceremonies at the mouth of Moonshine Hollow every spring, keeping the old taboos strong. Some ground stays cursed, he wrote in his letter. Best thing is to make sure nobody disturbs it again. I still have that leather pouch he gave me. Never been back to Tennessee though. Some mountains are better left alone. But sometimes, late at night when I've had too much bourbon, I dream about that hollow. In my dreams, the stills are running again, and something with yellow eyes watches from the tree line. In my dreams, I can smell moonshine and wild things, and I wake up with the taste of cursed alcohol on my tongue. The Cherokee were right about one thing. Some hungers, once awakened, never really go away. My name is Vincent Blackridge, but everyone calls me Vince. I've been a forest ranger for 11 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. Bears, wildcats, lost hikers, forest fires, you name it, I've dealt with it. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in November of 1967. I work out of a fire lookout tower on Mount Rogers, the highest peak in Virginia. It sits at 5,729 feet, and on a clear day, you can see for miles in every direction. The tower is my home during fire season, though by November, most folks think the danger's past. They're wrong about a lot of things. The tower itself is a simple wooden structure, maybe 40 feet tall, with a small cabin at the top that's got everything I need: radio equipment, weather instruments, a bed, and a small kitchen. It's isolated up here. The nearest person is 12 miles away, and my only connection to the outside world is through my radio. I used to be in the Air Force, working radar stations. Spent 4 years tracking aircraft across the sky, learning to tell the difference between a commercial plane and a military jet just by the blip on the screen. That experience taught me to trust my eyes and my instruments. When something doesn't belong in the sky, I know it. That's why what happened next still bothers me. It started on a cold Tuesday morning. I was drinking coffee and checking weather reports when my radio crackled to life. It was Jim Morrison from the ranger station down in Damascus. Vince, you copy? I'm here, Jim. What's going on? Got a weird one for you. State police found a hiker yesterday, up on the Appalachian Trail, woman named Margaret Sinclair. She's dead. I set my coffee down. Deaths in the forest weren't uncommon, but something in Jim's voice told me this was different. What happened to her? That's the thing nobody knows. No signs of a bear attack, no obvious injuries. But Vince, he paused. Her eyes were gone, both of them, cut out clean as a whistle. I felt my stomach turn. Cut out? Yeah, and here's the really strange part. They found these impressions in the mud near her body. Look like wing prints, but huge ones. Maybe 10 feet across. I stared out my window at the empty sky. November in Virginia meant most birds had already headed south for the winter. Even the eagles that sometimes soared around the peak were gone by now. Could be buzzards, I said, though I didn't believe it myself. They go for the eyes first. 10-foot wingspan, Vince. You ever see a buzzard that big? I hadn't. The largest birds in Virginia were maybe 6 feet across, and even that was pushing it. Any other details? The state boys are keeping it quiet, but word is they found something else. A message carved into a tree near the body. But they won't say what it said. After Jim signed off, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Not just the death, though, that was bad enough, but something about the whole situation. The timing, the missing eyes, those wing prints, it all felt connected to something bigger. I spent the rest of the morning scanning the sky with my binoculars, looking for anything unusual. The air was clear and cold, with that sharp bite that meant winter was coming fast. But there was something else too. A stillness that felt unnatural. By afternoon, I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The birds were gone. All of them. I'd been up in this tower long enough to know the sounds of the mountain, the calls of hawks, the chatter of crows, the drumming of woodpeckers. But now there was nothing. Just silence. I grabbed my radio and called down to Jim. "Hey, you notice anything strange about the birds lately?" "Now that you mention it, yeah. Haven't seen a crow in 2 days." "Why?" "Same up here. Everything's gone south, like they're running from something." "Running from what?" I looked out at the empty sky again, remembering those 10-foot wing prints in the mud. "I don't know," I said, "but I've got a bad feeling about it." That night, as I was getting ready for bed, my radio started picking up strange signals. Not voices exactly, but sounds that almost seemed like language. Low, rhythmic noises that made the hair on my arms stand up. I tried adjusting the frequency, thinking it might be interference from some military base, but the sounds followed me across the dial. I turned the radio off and went to bed, but I didn't sleep well. I kept thinking about Margaret Sinclair and those missing eyes, about the silence where birdsong should be, about those sounds on the radio that almost seemed to be trying to tell me something. Something was coming to the mountains. I could feel it in the air, in the unnatural quiet, in the way even the wind seemed to whisper warnings through the trees. I just didn't know what it was yet. 3 days later, I got my answer, and I wished I hadn't. I was eating breakfast when Jim's voice came through the radio, tight with worry. "Vince, we got another one." My coffee went cold in my hands. "Where?" "About 8 miles south of you, near the old mining trail. Hunter named Dale Morrison. Same thing, eyes gone, no obvious cause of death. But this one's different." "How different?" "They found him hanging from a cliff face, 50 feet up. No climbing gear, no ropes, no way he could have gotten up there on his own." I stared out my window toward the south, where morning mist was rising from the valleys. 50 feet up a cliff face. That was impossible. Maybe he fell from above? No way. The cliff goes straight up another 100 feet from where they found him, and there's no path up there. Plus, his body was arranged. Arranged how? Arms spread wide, like he was flying. And Vince, they found another message carved in a tree nearby. This time they told me what it said. "It-by." I waited, but Jim seemed reluctant to continue. "What did it say, Jim?" "Death comes from above." Cut deep into an oak tree, letters about 6 inches tall. Fresh carving, done with something sharp. I set my coffee cup down with a shaking hand. Death comes from above. I looked up at the sky automatically, half expecting to see something circling overhead. Any witnesses? Anyone see what happened? That's just it. Morrison's hunting buddy says they split up around noon yesterday. Said Dale was going to check some deer tracks near the cliff. When he didn't come back by nightfall, the buddy went looking and found him hanging there like some kind of scarecrow. What about those wing prints? Were there any? Yeah, all around the base of the cliff, same size as before, maybe bigger, and something else, the ground was all torn up, like there'd been a struggle. After Jim signed off, I couldn't sit still. I grabbed my binoculars and spent the morning scanning every inch of sky I could see. Nothing moved up there except a few wispy clouds. But that somehow made it worse. The emptiness felt wrong, like something had scared away everything that belonged in the air. Around noon, my radio crackled with an incoming call. But it wasn't Jim's voice. "This is State Police Officer Ray Hendricks. I'm trying to reach the ranger at Mount Rogers Lookout." I keyed the mic. "This is Vince Blackridge. What can I do for you, officer?" "I'm heading up your way with a federal investigator. We need to ask you some questions about the recent deaths in your area." A federal investigator. That meant this was bigger than just 2 dead hikers. "I'll be here," I said. They arrived 2 hours later, hiking the last mile up to my tower since the road only went so far. Officer Hendricks was a big man, maybe 40 years old, with the kind of steady eyes you'd want in a crisis. The federal investigator was a surprise, a woman about my age, wearing hiking boots and carrying a heavy pack. "Dr. Sarah Webb," she said, offering her hand. I specialize in unusual cases. Unusual how? She exchanged a look with Officer Hendricks. Cases where normal explanations don't fit the evidence. We climbed up to my cabin, and I made coffee while they got settled. Dr. Webb pulled out a thick folder and spread photos across my small table. I wished she hadn't. Margaret Sinclair looked peaceful enough, except for the dark holes where her eyes should have been. Dale Morrison was worse, his face frozen in a scream, arms spread wide against the cliff face like he was trying to fly. Tell me about the birds, Doctor, Webb said without looking up from the photos. What about them? When did they disappear? I thought about it. Started about a week ago. First the small ones, sparrows, finches, then the bigger ones. By 3 days ago, everything was gone. Everything? Haven't seen so much as a crow. Officer Hendricks leaned forward. In your experience, what would cause that kind of mass migration? Fire maybe, or a really bad storm coming, but we haven't had either. I paused. Sometimes they'll flee from a big predator, but it would have to be something they'd never encountered before. Dr. Webb looked up from the photos. Something new. Yeah, but what? The biggest predator birds we have around here are hawks and eagles, and like I said, they're already gone south for the winter. What if it wasn't from around here? She asked quietly. Before I could answer, we heard it. A sound like nothing I'd ever experienced. A deep, thrumming call that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. It made the windows of my cabin rattle and sent a chill straight through my bones. Officer Hendricks was on his feet, hand moving toward his gun. What the hell was that? I grabbed my binoculars and rushed to the window. The sound came again, closer this time, and I saw something that made my blood freeze. Flying toward us from the south, maybe half a mile away, was the biggest bird I'd ever seen. But as I focused the binoculars, I realized it wasn't a bird at all. It was shaped like a man, but with wings that must have been 15 feet across. Even at that distance, I could see the glow of its eyes, 2 red points of light that seemed to burn in the afternoon shadows. Dr. Webb, I said, my voice barely a whisper, I think you better look at this. She took the binoculars and looked toward the south. I watched her face go pale. Oh my God, she breathed. The thing was getting closer, flying with powerful strokes of those impossible wings. As it approached, I could make out more details. It was definitely shaped like a human, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with arms that ended in what looked like clawed hands. Officer Hendricks grabbed the binoculars. Jesus Christ. Is that thing coming here? It was. And as it got closer, that thrumming call came again, so loud this time that it felt like it was vibrating inside my skull. I could see its face now, or what passed for a face. It was mostly shadows, except for those burning red eyes. Then, about a quarter-mile away, it suddenly changed course. Instead of coming straight for the tower, it swooped down toward the forest below us. I lost sight of it among the trees, but I could hear the sound of breaking branches and that awful call echoing through the valleys. We stood there for maybe 10 minutes, none of us speaking, waiting for it to come back. But the forest had gone silent again. Did you get a good look at it? Dr. Webb asked finally. I nodded. Good enough. That wasn't any bird I've ever seen. No, she said quietly. It wasn't a bird at all. Officer Hendricks was still staring out the window. So what do we do now? Before anyone could answer, my radio crackled to life. It was Jim, and he sounded scared. Vince, you there? We got a problem down here. A big one. I'm here, Jim. What's wrong? I'm here. Found another body, camper named Lisa Rodriguez. But Vince, his voice broke. She was in a tree, 40 feet up in a damn tree, and there's something carved into her forehead. Dr. Webb grabbed the mic from my hand. This is Dr. Webb, federal investigator. What does the carving say? Jim's voice came back shaky. Says, Bridge Falls. And folks, there's something else. We got witnesses this time. My heart stopped. Witnesses to what? Couple of kids saw it happen. Say a giant birdman grabbed her right out of her tent and flew away. They're pretty shook up, but their story's consistent. I looked at Dr. Webb and Officer Hendricks. The thing we'd just seen was real, and it was hunting people. Jim, listen to me carefully, I said. Get everyone out of the forest. All the campers, all the hikers, everyone. Close the trails if you have to. Already working on it. But Vince, what the hell is that thing? I stared out the window at the empty sky, remembering those glowing red eyes and the sound that had made my bones ache. "I don't know," I said, "but I think it's just getting started." That night changed everything. We decided to stay in the tower, figuring it was the safest place around, high up, good visibility, and solid walls. Dr. Webb had equipment in her pack I'd never seen before. Cameras that could see in the dark, sound recording devices, and something that looked like a Geiger counter but measured electromagnetic fields instead of radiation. "I've been tracking similar incidents across the country," she told us as we settled in for what we hoped would be a quiet night. "Always the same pattern, mass bird migrations, then people start dying in impossible ways." "How many incidents?" Officer Hendricks asked. 17 in the past 2 years, all along the Appalachian chain, moving south to north. Whatever this thing is, it's following a route. I thought about that. Like it's going somewhere specific. That's what I think. And I believe Virginia might be its final destination. Around midnight, her electromagnetic detector started going crazy. The needle was jumping all over the place, and it was making a high-pitched whining sound that hurt my ears. "It's close," she whispered, checking the readout. "Very close." That's when Officer Hendricks screamed. I spun around and saw him standing by the window, his face white as paper. He was pointing at something outside, but his hand was shaking so badly I couldn't tell what he was looking at. I grabbed my flashlight and shined it out the window. For a second, I didn't see anything. Then I noticed the trees. Every tree around the tower, maybe 50 of them, had something perched in its branches. They looked like people at first, dark shapes hunched over like they were sleeping. But as my flashlight beam moved from tree to tree, I realized what I was seeing. Bodies. Human bodies, arranged in the branches like some kind of sick decoration. And they were all staring at us with empty eye sockets. "Oh God," Dr. Webb breathed. "There must be 20 of them." Officer Hendricks had his gun out now, but his hands were shaking too badly to aim. "What do we do? What the hell do we do?" That's when we heard the voice. It came from everywhere at once, like it was being broadcast from all around us. But it wasn't coming through the radio, it was inside our heads, speaking directly to our thoughts. "Asterisk, you have seen the warnings, asterisk," it said, and the words felt like ice water in my skull. "Asterisk, you have ignored them. Asterisk. Who are you?" Dr. Webb called out, her voice cracking. "What do you want?" Asterisk, "I am the herald. I bring word of what comes. But humans do not listen to words alone." Asterisk. The bodies in the trees began to move, turning their eyeless faces toward our tower. Some of them started to climb down, moving with jerky, unnatural motions like marionettes. Asterisk. "So I give you signs they cannot ignore." Asterisk. Officer Hendricks was backing away from the window. "This isn't happening. This can't be happening." That's when it appeared. The thing rose up from behind the trees like a nightmare-given form. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. It was 8 feet tall and shaped like a man, but wrong in every way that mattered. Its skin was dark and leathery, its arms too long, its fingers ending in claws that gleamed in the light. But it was the wings that really got to me. 15 feet of black membrane that seemed to absorb light instead of reflecting it. And those eyes. 2 red coals burning in a face that was more shadow than flesh, staring right at us with an intelligence that was ancient and utterly alien. Asterisk. "The bridge will fall," asterisk, it said, and I felt the words like physical blows. Asterisk. 46 will die when the Silver Bridge collapses. I have tried to warn them, but they do not listen. Asterisk. Silver Bridge? Dr. Webb gasped. That's in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Asterisk. December 15th. Rush hour. Metal fatigue in the I-bar suspension chain. Asterisk. Officer Hendricks was hyperventilating now. It's talking about the future. How can it know? The thing's head turned toward him with a motion too quick and smooth for anything that size. Asterisk. I see what comes. I have always seen. But humans only pay attention when there is blood. Asterisk. That's when Officer Hendricks made the worst decision of his life. He raised his gun and fired 3 shots at the creature. The bullets seemed to pass right through it like it was made of smoke. The thing's eyes flared brighter, and suddenly Hendricks was screaming, not from fear, from pain. He was clutching his head, dropping his gun, falling to his knees. Asterisk. You would silence the messenger? Asterisk. Hendricks rose into the air, not jumping, not climbing, just floating up like gravity had stopped working on him. He was maybe 6 feet off the floor when the windows of our cabin exploded outward. The creature was somehow pulling him through the air toward the broken window. Hendricks was screaming, clawing at nothing, his legs kicking uselessly. Stop, Dr. Webb shouted. Please, stop. The thing paused, holding Hendricks suspended in midair just outside the window. Will you listen now? Yes, she whispered. We'll listen. Asterisk. The bridge will fall. Many will die. Unless... Asterisk. Unless what? Asterisk. Unless someone spreads the warning. Someone they will believe. Asterisk. I found my voice. What kind of warning? Asterisk. Tell them to stay away from the Silver Bridge on December 15th. Tell them a storm is coming that will bring it down. Asterisk. But there's no storm predicted. Asterisk. There will be. Asterisk. The creature's eyes burned brighter. Asterisk. I do not lie about death. Asterisk. It looked at Officer Hendricks, still floating helplessly in its invisible grip. Then, without warning, it let go. Hendricks fell 200 feet onto the rocks below. The sound he made when he hit would haunt me for the rest of my life. Dr. Webb was crying now, staring at the broken window. Why? He was going to listen. You didn't have to. Asterisk. He tried to kill the messenger. That cannot be allowed. Asterisk. The thing settled onto the platform outside our cabin, its wings folding against its back. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Its face was mostly shadow, but I could see the outline of sharp teeth when it spoke. Asterisk. You will carry the warning. Asterisk, it said, focusing those burning eyes on me. Asterisk. To Point Pleasant, to the newspapers, to anyone who will listen. Asterisk. What if they don't believe me? Asterisk. Then they will join the others in December. Asterisk. It reached into the cabin with one clawed hand and touched Dr. Webb's recording equipment. Sparks flew from every device as they burned out. Asterisk. No evidence, no proof, only your word and the warning. Asterisk. Why me? I asked. Asterisk. Because you have seen death from above, because you understand what it means to watch and wait, because you know the cost of not being believed. Asterisk. The creature stood up, spreading those impossible wings. Asterisk. 46 people, Ranger. Remember that number. Remember their faces when the bridge falls and you realize you could have saved them. Asterisk. It launched itself into the air with one powerful stroke of its wings. As it circled overhead, that thrumming call echoed through the mountains one more time. Asterisk. The herald comes to Point Pleasant. The warnings will continue until someone listens. Asterisk. Then it was gone, disappearing into the darkness like it had never been there at all. Dr. Webb and I sat in the ruins of our cabin, surrounded by broken glass and smoking electronics. Down below, Officer Hendricks lay twisted among the rocks, his body broken and still. It's going to Point Pleasant, she whispered. I nodded, staring at the empty sky where the thing had vanished. December 15th, the Silver Bridge, 46 people. We have to warn them. Who's going to believe us? We don't have any proof. All our equipment is destroyed. I thought about that for a long time. She was right. Without evidence, we'd sound like crazy people. But I kept hearing the creature's words. Asterisk. Remember their faces when the bridge falls, and you realize you could have saved them. Asterisk. I don't know, I finally said, but we have to try. Outside, the bodies in the trees had vanished as suddenly as they'd appeared. But I could still feel those empty eye sockets staring at us, reminding us of what happened to people who ignored the warnings. The thing was heading north toward Point Pleasant, and God help anyone who got in its way. The federal agents arrived at dawn. I was sitting in the ruins of my cabin, drinking cold coffee and staring at the spot where Officer Hendricks had died when I heard the helicopters. 3 of them, black and unmarked, landing in the clearing below my tower. Dr. Webb had been awake all night, scribbling notes in a notebook, the only piece of recording equipment that had survived the creature's electromagnetic blast. She looked up as the helicopters settled. That was fast, she said grimly. Too fast, like they were already on their way. Men in dark suits climbed out of the helicopters, along with a cleanup crew that immediately went to work on Officer Hendrix's body. The lead agent climbed up to my cabin, a thin man with cold eyes and a badge that identified him as Agent Morrison. "Mr. Blackridge, Dr. Webb. I'm Agent Morrison, and I'm here to help you understand what happened last night." "Understand?" I laughed bitterly. "I understand plenty. That thing killed a good man and flew off to Point Pleasant to kill more people." Agent Morrison sat down at my table like he owned the place. "What thing would that be?" Dr. Webb slammed her notebook shut. "Don't play games with us. You know exactly what we saw. What I know is that Officer Hendrix fell from this tower during a severe electromagnetic storm. What I know is that Dr. Webb's equipment malfunctioned due to unusual atmospheric conditions. What I know is that stress and isolation can cause people to see things that aren't really there." I stood up so fast my chair fell over. "Are you calling us liars? I'm offering you an explanation that won't ruin your careers or land you in a psychiatric ward." Dr. Webb was shaking with anger. "People are going to die. The Silver Bridge is a perfectly safe structure that's been inspected regularly by qualified engineers." Agent Morrison pulled out a thick folder. "However, recent reports of unusual wildlife behavior in this area have prompted us to conduct a thorough investigation. We'll need both of you to sign these documents, acknowledging that your experiences were the result of natural phenomena." I grabbed the folder and threw it across the room. Natural phenomena? That thing spoke to us. It told us exactly when and how 46 people are going to die. "Mr. Blackridge, you're a respected forest ranger with 11 years of service. Dr. Webb, you're a scientist with multiple degrees and a spotless reputation. Do you really want to throw all that away for a story about a flying monster?" The threat was clear. Sign their papers and keep quiet, or have our lives destroyed. Dr. Webb picked up her notebook. "What about the other incidents?" 17 cases across the Appalachian region. "What other incidents?" "Our files show no unusual deaths in this area beyond normal hiking accidents and animal attacks." They were erasing everything. All the evidence, all the witness reports, all the documentation that might prove what we'd seen. In a few weeks, it would be like none of it ever happened. "You can't cover this up forever," I said. "When that bridge falls, if the Silver Bridge ever has structural problems, they'll be addressed through proper engineering channels, not because of supernatural warnings from imaginary creatures." Agent Morrison stood up and straightened his tie. "You have 24 hours to decide. Sign the documents and accept transfers to new positions far from here, or face immediate termination and psychiatric evaluation." After they left, Dr. Webb and I sat in silence for a long time. "They're going to let those people die," she finally said. "Not if I can help it." She looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking someone needs to get to Point Pleasant and warn people directly. Official channels be damned. They'll destroy us. They'll destroy us anyway if we stay quiet and those people die." That afternoon, I packed my truck with everything I could carry and started driving north toward West Virginia. Dr. Webb came with me. She said she'd rather lose her career trying to save lives than keep it by letting people die. We reached Point Pleasant just as the sun was setting on November 20th. It was a small town, maybe 5,000 people, sitting right on the Ohio River. The Silver Bridge stretched across the water, connecting West Virginia to Ohio, a beautiful suspension bridge that looked solid as a mountain. But I remembered the creature's words. Asterisk. Metal fatigue in the I-bar suspension chain. Asterisk. We checked into a motel and spent the evening trying to figure out how to warn people without sounding insane. The local newspaper wouldn't talk to us. The police thought we were crazy. The mayor's office wouldn't return our calls. That's when the sightings started. The first one was reported on November 22nd. A couple driving near the old power plant saw a giant bird-like creature with glowing red eyes. Then a group of teenagers saw it near the abandoned munitions bunkers. By Thanksgiving, half the town was talking about the Mothman, their name for the creature I'd seen in the mountains. But instead of taking it as a warning, they treated it like a tourist attraction. People started coming to Point Pleasant, hoping to see the monster. The local newspaper ran stories about it. Someone even made t-shirts. They didn't understand. This wasn't some harmless mystery. It was death giving them one last chance to save themselves. Dr. Webb and I spent 2 weeks trying to warn anyone who would listen. We talked to reporters, city officials, bridge workers, anyone we could find. A few people listened politely, but nobody took us seriously. On December 13th, 2 days before the date the creature had given us, I was standing on the Silver Bridge looking for signs of structural damage. I didn't find any. The bridge looked perfect, but I felt like I was standing on a time bomb. That night, the Mothman appeared to me one last time. I was alone in my motel room when the temperature suddenly dropped 20 degrees. The lights flickered, and that familiar electromagnetic pressure filled the air. When I looked up, it was standing by the window, those red eyes burning in the darkness. Asterisk. You tried to warn them. Asterisk. Not hard enough. They won't listen. Asterisk. They never do. That is why the warnings must be written in blood. Asterisk. There has to be another way. Asterisk. There is always another way. But humans only learn through loss. Asterisk. The creature moved closer, and I could feel the cold radiating from its body. Asterisk. Tomorrow, the bridge will be full of Christmas shoppers returning from Ohio. Rush hour traffic, families with children, people who have never heard of the Mothman or the warnings you tried to give. Asterisk. How many will really die? Asterisk. 46. I have seen their faces. I know their names. Asterisk. I closed my eyes, thinking about all those people crossing the bridge tomorrow, completely unaware that they were driving toward death. Is there anything that can stop it? Asterisk. The damage is already done. Metal fatigue, years in the making. The bridge will fall at 4:58 p.m. when the weight of traffic exceeds the strength of the failing eye-bar. Asterisk. Then why give warnings at all? Why not just let it happen? The creature tilted its head, and for a moment, those burning eyes almost looked sad. Asterisk. Because someone must remember. Someone must know that death tried to speak, tried to warn, tried to save them. When the bridge falls and the investigation begins, someone must know it could have been prevented. Asterisk. It moved toward the window, wings spreading. Asterisk. You have done what you could, Vincent Blackridge. The rest is not your responsibility. Asterisk. Wait, I called out. What are you? Why do you do this? It paused at the window, silhouetted against the night sky. Asterisk. I am what remains when death touches a soul but does not take it. I am the warning that comes before the harvest. I am the voice that speaks for those who will die unheard. Asterisk. But why? Asterisk. Because someone must. Asterisk. The creature launched itself into the darkness, and I never saw it again. The next day, December 15th, 1967, I stood on the Ohio side of the Silver Bridge at 4:55 p.m., watching the rush hour traffic flow across the span. Cars full of Christmas shoppers, people heading home from work, children pressed against windows looking at the river below. At exactly 4:58 p.m., the Silver Bridge collapsed. I watched 46 people fall into the icy waters of the Ohio River, and I knew there was nothing I could have done to stop it. The investigation took 6 months. Federal engineers determined that the collapse was caused by the failure of a single eye-bar in the suspension chain, exactly what the creature had told us. Metal fatigue, they called it. A tiny crack that had been growing for years, invisible to inspectors, until the weight of rush hour traffic finally exceeded the bridge's ability to bear it. 46 people died, just as the Mothman had predicted. Dr. Webb and I were interviewed by the investigators, but we never mentioned our encounter with the creature. Agent Morrison made sure of that. Our signed statements described the incident at the fire tower as stress-induced hallucinations brought on by electromagnetic disturbances and isolation. Dr. Webb was transferred to a desk job in Washington, analyzing weather patterns. I was reassigned to a ranger station in Florida, as far from the mountains as they could send me. Neither of us ever spoke publicly about what we'd really seen, but I never stopped thinking about it. The Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant stopped after the bridge collapse. The creature had delivered its warning, had tried to prevent the tragedy in the only way it knew how. When that failed, it simply vanished, leaving behind only stories and questions that would never be answered. Over the years, I've followed reports of similar creatures in other parts of the country. Always the same pattern: mass bird migrations, impossible deaths, and warnings that no one takes seriously until it's too late. I think the Mothman is still out there, still trying to warn people about disasters they refuse to prevent. I retired from the Forest Service in 1985, and moved back to Virginia, to a small house not far from Mount Rogers. Sometimes, on clear nights, I climb back up to the old fire tower. It's abandoned now, but still standing. I sit there and listen to the sounds of the forest, remembering what it was like when all the birds suddenly went silent. Dr. Webb died in 1993. Heart attack, the doctors said, but I think she just got tired of carrying the weight of all those people we couldn't save. She never married, never had children. The Mothman took more than just Officer Hendricks that night on the mountain. It took pieces of all of us. I'm 78 years old now, and I know I don't have many years left. That's why I'm finally telling this story, even though I know most people will think I'm just another crazy old man spinning tales about monsters in the mountains. But I need someone to know the truth about what happened in 1967. I need someone to understand that the Mothman wasn't a monster, it was a warning. A desperate attempt by something beyond our understanding to save lives that didn't need to be lost. The creature was right about one thing. Humans only learn through loss. We had our chance to listen, to heed the warnings, to save those 46 people. Instead, we covered it up, dismissed it, and let them die. Sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the Mothman is still out there somewhere, watching and waiting, trying to warn us about the next disaster we're too stubborn to prevent. Part of me hopes it is. Part of me hopes that somewhere, someone is listening to the warnings and acting on them. But mostly, I just remember those red eyes in the darkness and the voice that spoke directly to our minds. Asterisk. Remember their faces when the bridge falls and you realize you could have saved them. Asterisk. I do remember. Every single day, I remember. And I pray that someday, someone will listen before it's too late. The Silver Bridge was rebuilt in 1969, with better materials and more frequent inspections. But they can't rebuild the lives that were lost or take back the warnings that went unheeded. The Mothman tried to save them. We failed. That's a weight I'll carry until the day I die.